Hello friends. Did you know nearly 80% of those who watch my videos aren't subscribed? If you enjoy these stories, please hit that subscribe button and leave a like. It really helps. Thank you for being here. By the way, where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments. My name is Mason Briggs, and I've been a truck driver for 17 years. Over all these years, I thought I'd seen everything you could possibly encounter on the road. Strange hitchhikers, dangerous weather conditions, drunk drivers at 3 a.m, accidents I narrowly escaped. I thought I knew what loneliness meant, the true meaning of isolation while traveling on endless highways with only your thoughts and the hum of the engine for company. I was wrong. This happened in January 2019. I was transporting industrial machine parts from Portland, Oregon, to a distribution center outside Bakersfield, California. It wasn't a very enjoyable job, but the pay was good, and the company I worked for treated me well. The load was heavy, just under the legal limit, and the dispatcher told me to take Highway 97 south through the high desert instead of the usual I-5 corridor. There was some kind of construction work on the road, which would add 6 hours to my trip. Neither of us wanted that. I remember the weather report that morning. Clear skies, cold but manageable. The kind of winter day in the Northwest that makes you grateful you're not stuck in some East Coast blizzard. I loaded up on coffee at a truck stop in Salem, grabbed a couple of those questionable gas station burritos that would either keep me going or kill me by nightfall, and hit the road around 7 a.m. The first few hours were uneventful. I-5 was its usual self, busy but moving, and I made good time getting out of the Willamette Valley. When I merged onto 97 near Weed, the traffic thinned out considerably. That's one thing I've always liked about the desert routes. You get a sense of space out there, a feeling that you're really traveling somewhere instead of just sitting in a metal box surrounded by other metal boxes. By early afternoon, I was well into the high desert. The landscape had changed from the green forests of Oregon to the brown and beige emptiness of the interior. Sagebrush, scattered juniper trees, and not much else. The sky was that pale winter blue that seems to go on forever, and I had the road mostly to myself. A few passenger cars passed me going north, and I overtook a couple of RVs driven by retirees heading south to escape the cold. But for the most part, it was just me and the Peterbilt. I've always been comfortable with solitude. Some guys in this business, they can't handle the quiet. They need the CB radio going constantly, or they're on their phones talking to someone every chance they get. Not me. I grew up in rural Montana, and I learned early on that silence isn't something to be afraid of. It's just the absence of noise, nothing more. But there's different kinds of silence, I've learned. There's the comfortable silence of a quiet morning, and then there's the other kind. The kind that feels wrong somehow, like the air itself is holding its breath. I didn't notice it at first. Somewhere around 3 p.m, I passed through the tiny town of Likely, which is barely a wide spot in the road. A gas station, a few houses, and not much else. I topped off the tank even though I had plenty of fuel because out here you take every opportunity to fill up. The attendant was a young guy, maybe early 20s, and he seemed eager to talk. "Heading south?" he asked, which was obvious given the direction I'd pulled in from. "Bakersfield," I told him, swiping my company card. He nodded, then paused like he wanted to say something else. Finally, he asked, "You taking 97 the whole way or cutting over to 395? 97, I said. "Why?" He shrugged, but there was something in his expression I couldn't quite read. Just asking. "Weather's supposed to hold, so you should be fine." I thought it was a strange thing to say, but I thanked him and got back in the cab. I've learned not to read too much into what people say at gas stations. Everybody's got an opinion about which route is best, what the weather's going to do, or what truck stop has the best showers. Most of it's just talk. I pulled back onto 97 and kept heading south. The sun was starting to lower in the sky, and the shadows were getting longer. This was my favorite time of day for driving, actually. The light has a certain quality in the late afternoon, especially in winter, that makes everything look sharper and clearer. I settled into my seat, adjusted the volume on my radio, and let the miles roll by. That's when I started to notice something odd. I'd been listening to a classic rock station out of Reno for the last hour. The signal wasn't great, but it was decent enough. They were playing the usual stuff, Led Zeppelin and The Who and Lynyrd Skynyrd. Songs I'd heard 1,000 times before. But then, somewhere around 4:30, the station started to fade. That's not unusual in the high desert. Signals come and go, especially in the valleys between ridges. But what was strange was how it faded. It didn't just get weaker and fill with static the way stations usually do when you're losing signal. Instead, the music seemed to slow down, like someone was gradually reducing the speed on a record player. I reached for the dial, thinking maybe my radio was acting up. I switched to FM seek mode, and the tuner scanned through the frequencies. Nothing. Not even static. Just silence on every station. I tried AM next. Same thing. The tuner would scan through the entire band without picking up a single signal, not even the distant mumble of a talk radio show or a weather report. I told myself it was just the terrain. I was in a valley between two ridges, and the mountains were blocking the signals. It would come back once I got over the next rise. I turned the radio off and drove in silence, listening to the steady rumble of the engine and the hiss of the tires on the pavement. But the music didn't come back. 20 minutes later, when I was clear of any obvious obstacles, I tried the radio again. Still nothing. My phone, which I kept mounted on the dashboard for GPS, was showing no signal either. Not even one bar. I wasn't worried yet. Dead zones happen out here. You can drive for 50 miles sometimes without seeing a cell tower. The GPS would work off satellite anyway, so I'd still know where I was going. I glanced at the screen and saw the blue line of my route stretching south, with my position marked as a small arrow moving steadily along it. The road itself was empty. I hadn't seen another vehicle in almost an hour, which wasn't entirely unusual for this stretch, but it added to the sense of isolation. The sun was getting lower now, turning the sky a pale orange that made the shadows look almost black in contrast. The landscape was unchanging, mile after mile of sagebrush and dried grass, with the occasional rock formation breaking up the monotony. I checked my logbook. I'd been driving for about 9 hours, which meant I had another couple of hours before I'd need to take my mandatory rest break. I was making good time, and if everything went smoothly, I'd make it to Bakersfield by tomorrow afternoon with plenty of time to spare. That's when I saw the mile marker. It was the kind of thing you pass hundreds of times without really noticing. A small green sign with white numbers mounted on a post by the side of the road, but this one caught my eye because of the number on it. Mile 187. I'd passed mile 187 about 40 minutes ago. I was sure of it. I'd noticed it because that's the same number as the address of the house I grew up in back in Montana. It's funny how your brain will latch onto random details like that. I remembered seeing that marker and thinking briefly about my childhood home before my mind wandered on to other things. But now, here it was again. Mile 187. I slowed down, staring at the marker as I passed it. There was no mistake. It clearly read 187. I checked my GPS, but the screen had frozen on the last known position. The arrow still pointing south along 97, but not moving anymore. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe they'd reused the numbers in different sections. Maybe I was more tired than I thought and had gotten confused. I'd been on the road for 9 hours straight, after all. The mind plays tricks when you're tired. I kept driving, watching the side of the road more carefully now. 5 minutes later, another mile marker appeared. Mile 187. My hands tightened on the steering wheel. This wasn't right. This wasn't possible. Mile markers don't repeat. That's the whole point of them. They're sequential, marking your progress along the highway. But here it was again. The same number, in the same style, on the same kind of post. I pressed harder on the accelerator, suddenly eager to put distance between myself and that marker. The engine responded, the speedometer climbing to 75, then 80. I watched the road, waiting for the next marker to appear. It took longer than it should have. At 80 miles an hour, I should have been seeing a new mile marker every 45 seconds or so. But several minutes passed before I saw another one emerging from the gathering dusk. Mile 187. I don't scare easily. 17 years on the road, you see things that would shake most people. I've had brake failures on mountain passes. I've been run off the road by drunk drivers. I've driven through weather that made me question every decision I'd ever made. But I'd never felt the kind of cold, creeping dread that I felt looking at that mile marker. Something was wrong with this road. Something was fundamentally, impossibly wrong. I tried the radio again, more out of desperation than hope. The tuner scanned through the frequencies, finding nothing but silence. Then, just as it was about to cycle back to the beginning, it caught something. A faint signal, barely audible over the background hiss. I turned up the volume, straining to hear. It sounded like a voice, distant and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I adjusted the tuner, trying to lock onto the signal, but it kept drifting in and out. Then, suddenly, it came in clear. A man's voice, calm and professional, like a radio announcer. 187, the voice said. Mile 187, mile 187. That's all it said. Just those words, repeated over and over in that same calm, measured tone. Mile 187, mile 187. I turned the radio off, my heart pounding. The silence that followed was somehow worse than the voice. I could hear my own breathing, loud in the enclosed space of the cab. I could hear the engine, the tires, the small creaks and rattles of the truck as it moved down the road. And underneath it all, so faint I almost thought I was imagining it, I could hear something else. A sound like distant static, or wind, or voices speaking too quietly to understand. The sun was setting now, the sky fading from orange to deep purple. I'd need to turn on my headlights soon. I reached for the switch, and that's when I realized something else was wrong. The road ahead of me looked exactly like the road behind me. I don't mean it looked similar. I mean it looked identical. The same patches of asphalt, the same cracks, the same faded yellow center line. It was like I was driving through a loop, seeing the same stretch of highway over and over again. I slowed down to 60, then 50, my eyes scanning the roadside for anything that looked different, any landmark or feature that would prove I was making progress. But everything looked the same sagebrush, the same rocks, the same empty horizon. The light was fading fast now. In the desert, when the sun goes down, it goes down quickly. I switched on my headlights and the beam cut through the gathering darkness, illuminating the road ahead. That's when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder about a quarter-mile ahead, its emergency flashers blinking in the gloom. As I got closer, I could see it was another Peterbilt, similar to mine but older, with a faded blue paint job. The trailer was empty, the doors standing open. I slowed down, pulling up behind it. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep driving, to not stop, to get away from this place as fast as I could. But truck drivers have a code. If someone's in trouble, you stop, you help. That's just how it is. I put the truck in park but left the engine running. I grabbed my flashlight from the side compartment and climbed down from the cab. The air outside was cold, much colder than it should have been. My breath formed clouds in front of my face. The other truck's cab was empty. I could see that even before I walked over to it. The driver's door was ajar, the interior light on, but there was no one inside. I called out, my voice sounding strange in the stillness. "Hello? Anyone here?" No response. I walked around the truck, shining my flashlight on the ground, looking for any sign of where the driver might have gone. There were no footprints in the dirt beside the road, no indication that anyone had walked away from the vehicle. I climbed up onto the step and looked inside the cab. The keys were still in the ignition. A half-empty cup of coffee sat in the cup holder, still lukewarm to the touch. A paperback book lay open on the passenger seat, like someone had just set it down and stepped away for a moment. On the dashboard, barely visible in the dim light, was a small notebook. I picked it up and flipped it open. It was a logbook, the old-fashioned paper kind that some guys still prefer over the electronic versions. The last entry was dated January 15th, 2019. 3 weeks ago. The handwriting was hurried, almost frantic. Mile 187. Can't get past mile 187. Radio keeps repeating. Same stretch of road, same mile marker. Have been driving for 6 hours. Fuel gauge not moving. This isn't right. This isn't... The entry stopped there. The sentence unfinished. I flipped through the rest of the pages, but they were blank. I climbed down from the cab, my hands shaking. I should have left right then. I should have gotten back in my truck and driven away, consequences be damned, but I couldn't. I was frozen, staring at that abandoned truck, trying to make sense of what I'd just read. That's when I heard it, a sound coming from the trailer. It was faint, barely audible, but definitely there, a scraping sound, like something being dragged across metal. I walked slowly toward the back of the trailer, every nerve in my body screaming at me to turn around. The trailer doors were open, swinging slightly in a breeze I couldn't feel. I shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Completely empty. Just bare metal walls and floor, lit by the beam of my flashlight. But the sound continued. Scrape. Pause. Scrape. Pause. It was coming from inside the trailer, but there was nothing there. Nothing I could see anyway. I backed away, slowly, keeping the flashlight trained on the trailer. The sound stopped. The silence that followed was absolute. Not even the whisper of wind or the distant hum of my own truck's engine. Then the radio in the abandoned truck crackled to life. "Mile 187, the calm voice said. "Mile 187. I ran. I don't remember making the decision to run. I just found myself sprinting back to my truck, my boots pounding on the asphalt, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I climbed into the cab and slammed the door, locking it behind me. My own radio was on, even though I'd turned it off. The same voice was speaking through my speakers. "Mile 187. Mile 187. Mile 187. I threw the truck into gear and pulled back onto the road, the tires squealing as I accelerated. In my mirrors, I could see the abandoned truck receding into the darkness, its flashers still blinking. I drove fast, faster than I should have, pushing the speedometer past 85. I didn't care about speed limits or safety or anything except getting away from that place. The voice on the radio continued its monotonous chant, and I couldn't turn it off. Every time I reached for the power button, my hand would freeze, like some part of me knew that the voice was the only thing keeping me tethered to reality. The headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, and I focused on that tunnel, on the white line at the edge of the road, on anything except the growing certainty that I was not going to escape this place. I don't know how long I drove like that. Time had become slippery, unreliable. It felt like hours, but when I checked the clock on my dashboard, only 20 minutes had passed since I'd left the abandoned truck. Then, finally, I saw it. A different mile marker. Mile 188. The relief was so intense I almost cried. I'd made it. Whatever that place was, I'd gotten through it. The radio voice stopped mid-sentence, replaced by blessed silence. Then the familiar sound of static before a country music station came through clear and strong. My phone chimed, the sudden sound making me jump. Signals flooding back. Text messages and missed calls downloading all at once. My GPS screen refreshed, showing my position moving steadily south along Route 97, right where I should be. I pulled over at the next town I came to, a little place called Alturas. I parked in the lot of a truck stop and just sat there for a while, my hands still gripping the steering wheel, trying to process what had just happened. I told myself it was fatigue. I'd been driving too long, and my brain had started playing tricks on me. The mile markers, the abandoned truck, the voice on the radio, all of it could be explained by exhaustion and stress. I'd heard stories of truckers hallucinating after long hauls. This was just that, nothing more. I went inside the truck stop and bought a cup of coffee. The cashier was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, and just seeing another person, hearing her normal, everyday voice asking if I needed anything else, helped ground me back in reality. "You look like you've seen a ghost," she said, handing me my change. I tried to smile. "Just tired. Long day." She nodded sympathetically. "You be careful out there. These desert roads can mess with your head if you're not used to them." I thanked her and went back outside. The truck stop was quiet, just a couple of other rigs parked for the night. Normal. Everything was normal. I sat in my truck, drinking the coffee, and pulled out my logbook. I needed to record my hours, note my location, all the standard procedure. But when I looked at the log, something made me pause. According to my hours of service, I'd been driving for 11 hours. But according to the clock on my dashboard, only 9 hours had passed since I'd left Portland that morning. I was missing 2 hours. I stared at the numbers, checking and rechecking, but there was no mistake. The math didn't add up. Somewhere on that stretch of road near mile 187, I'd lost 2 hours. Or gained them. I couldn't tell which. I considered calling my dispatcher, but what would I say? That I'd driven through some kind of time anomaly. That I'd heard voices on the radio and seen an abandoned truck that shouldn't have been there. They'd think I was crazy. Hell, I thought I was crazy. So I did what any rational person would do. I decided to forget about it. I convinced myself that I'd made an error in my logbook, that I'd miscalculated somewhere. I finished my coffee, logged my rest break, and tried to get some sleep. But sleep didn't come easily. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that mile marker. Mile 187. And I heard that voice, calm and relentless, speaking words that shouldn't have meant anything but somehow meant everything. Mile 187. I gave up on sleeping around 2 in the morning. I figured I'd gotten enough rest to be legal, and I wanted to put more distance between myself and that stretch of road. I started up the truck and pulled back onto the highway, heading south. The rest of the trip was uneventful. I made it to Bakersfield the next afternoon, delivered my load, and picked up another one heading north. I drove back through California and Oregon, taking I-5 this time instead of Route 97. I told myself I'd never take that desert route again. But here's the thing that still keeps me awake at night. About a week after I got back home, I was talking to another driver at a truck stop in Portland. Older guy, been driving even longer than me. We got to talking about routes, and I mentioned that I'd been down through the high desert recently. "You take 97?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "South of Likely." His expression changed, just a little, but I noticed. "You run into anything strange?" I hesitated, not sure how much to say. "Like what?" "Like a stretch of road that doesn't feel right, where the mile markers don't match up." My blood ran cold. "Mile 187? He nodded slowly. "So you saw it too. The dead signal mile, some guys call it. I've heard stories about it for years, but I always thought they were just stories. Until I drove through it myself about 5 years back." "What is it?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. He shook his head. "I don't know. Nobody knows. Some guys think it's a glitch in the GPS system, some kind of mapping error. Others say it's something else, something wrong with that particular stretch of road. All I know is people who drive through it, they come out different. They lose time. They see things. Like an abandoned truck? Sometimes. Other times it's other things. One guy told me he saw his own truck parked on the shoulder. Said he got out and looked inside and saw himself sitting in the driver's seat, just staring ahead at nothing." I wanted to ask more questions, but part of me didn't want to know the answers. We finished our coffee in silence, and eventually we went our separate ways. I did some research when I got home. I searched online for any reports of anomalies on Route 97, anything that might explain what I'd experienced. I found a few forum posts, mostly from truckers and long-haul drivers, talking about strange experiences in that area. Lost time, repeating landmarks, radio signals that shouldn't exist. One post mentioned the mile marker specifically. Mile 187. The poster claimed that a stretch of road was built over an old pioneer trail, where dozens of settlers had died trying to cross the desert in the 1800s. Another post said there used to be a small town there that was abandoned in the 1950s, though I couldn't find any records to confirm that. Most of the posts ended the same way. People saying they'd never drive that route again, people warning others to avoid it, but also, inevitably, people dismissing the whole thing as fatigue-induced hallucinations or mechanical issues with GPS systems and radios. I wanted to believe those explanations. I really did. But then, about a month later, I was watching the news and saw a story that made my stomach drop. A truck driver had been found dead in his rig on Route 97, south of Likely, California. The report said he'd been there for several weeks before anyone found him. The cause of death was listed as heart failure. But what struck me was the location, mile 187. The news report didn't mention anything unusual. Just a tragic case of a driver dying alone on the road, something that happens more often than people realize in this business. But I knew. I knew there was more to the story. I tried to find more information, but there wasn't much to find. The driver's name was Dale Morrison, 53 years old, from Oregon. He'd been driving for 25 years. No history of heart problems. He was supposed to deliver a load to Bakersfield, but never showed up. I thought about that logbook I'd found in the abandoned truck. The frantic handwriting. The words that stopped mid-sentence. I wondered if Dale Morrison had written something similar. If his last moments had been spent trying to understand what was happening to him, trying to escape a stretch of road that wouldn't let him go. I haven't driven Route 97 since that January. I've turned down loads that would take me that way, even when they paid well. My dispatcher thinks I'm being superstitious, and maybe I am. But I've been in this business long enough to trust my instincts, and my instincts tell me to stay away from that road. But here's what really scares me. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm driving through some empty stretch of highway far from any town, my radio will start to drift between stations. And in that brief moment of static between signals, I'll hear it. That voice, calm and measured and utterly wrong. Mile 187. It only lasts a second, maybe less. Then it's gone, replaced by whatever station I was listening to. I tell myself it's just interference, just random noise that my brain interprets as words because it's expecting to hear them. But I don't believe that, not really, because I've noticed something else. When I hear that voice, I check my GPS, and every time, without exception, the screen will freeze for just a moment. The arrow showing my position will stop moving, and the map will glitch, showing me in a different location entirely. Mile 187 on Route 97. Then it corrects itself, and everything goes back to normal. But for that brief moment, according to my GPS, I'm back there. Back on that stretch of road where time doesn't work right and the mile markers repeat forever. I've started keeping a log of when it happens. It's not frequent, maybe once every couple of months, but there's no pattern to it. Different roads, different times of day, different weather conditions. The only constant is that I'm always alone when it happens. No other cars around, no towns nearby. Just me and the empty road. Last month it happened 3 times in 1 week. The voice is getting clearer too. I used to have to strain to hear it through the static, but now it comes through as clear as if someone was sitting right next to me, speaking directly into my ear. Mile 187. And then, just 2 days ago, something new happened. I was driving through Nevada, another desert route, but nowhere near Route 97. It was mid-afternoon, bright sunlight, not a cloud in the sky. My radio was off. I know it was off because I specifically remembered turning it off when I stopped for lunch. But then I heard it, that voice, louder than it had ever been before, so loud it made me jump. Mile 187, you left something behind. My hands jerked on the wheel, and I nearly swerved into the other lane. I managed to correct, pulling over to the shoulder with my heart hammering in my chest. The radio was still off. The power light wasn't even on, but I could hear the voice faint now, like it was coming from somewhere far away. You left something behind. I sat there for a long time, staring at the radio, waiting for it to speak again. But it didn't. Eventually, I convinced myself I'd imagined it. Stress, lack of sleep, the mind playing tricks. But I can't stop thinking about those words. What did I leave behind? The abandoned truck? The notebook with the unfinished entry? Or something else, something I haven't realized yet? I've thought about going back. Driving Route 97 again. Going to mile 187. Seeing if I can figure out what's happening there. But I'm afraid of what I might find. Or worse, I'm afraid I might not find anything at all. That I'd drive through that stretch of road and it would be completely normal, just another mile marker on another highway, and I'd have to accept that whatever happened to me that night was all in my head. I don't know which possibility frightens me more, so I keep driving. I take my loads, I make my deliveries, and I try not to think about mile 187. But it's always there in the back of my mind, like a splinter I can't quite work free. And sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone on some empty highway with nothing but the stars and the road stretching out ahead of me, I wonder if I ever really left that place at all. If maybe I'm still there, still driving through that endless loop, still passing the same mile marker over and over again. Mile 187, mile 187, mile 187. Maybe we're all there. All of us who drove through it. Maybe that's what the abandoned truck meant. Maybe Dale Morrison is still there too, still trying to find a way out. Or maybe, and this is what keeps me awake at night, maybe there is no way out. Maybe once that road gets its hooks into you, it never fully lets go. Maybe you carry it with you, a piece of that impossible place lodged somewhere in your soul, and every time you hear that voice, every time your GPS glitches to show mile 187, you're being pulled back there, inch by inch, mile by mile. I don't know. I wish I did. All I know is this. If you ever find yourself on Route 97, south of Likely, and you see mile 187, don't stop. Don't slow down. Don't look too closely at the mile markers or listen too carefully to your radio. Just keep driving. Keep driving and pray you make it to mile 188. Because if you don't, if you get stuck in that dead signal mile like Dale Morrison did, like I almost did, you might never leave. And the worst part is you might not even realize you're still there. I need to tell you something about that voice on the radio. Something I didn't mention before because I wasn't ready to admit it. Not even to myself. It wasn't coming from the radio. Not really. I know how that sounds. I know what you're thinking. But I've been going over that night in my head for months now, replaying every detail, and I'm certain of it. The radio was a conduit, maybe, a way for the sound to reach me, but the source was somewhere else. Somewhere deeper. 3 months after my first encounter with mile 187, I was still taking loads, still driving, but I'd become more careful about my routes. I mapped everything out in advance, double-checked that I wouldn't be going anywhere near that stretch of Route 97. My dispatcher thought I was developing some kind of OCD, but I didn't care. I wasn't going back there, not willingly. The problem was, mile 187 seemed to be coming to me. It started small. Little things I could almost convince myself were coincidences. I'd be driving through Arizona on I-10, and my odometer would freeze at 187 miles. Just for a second, then it would correct itself. I'd pull into a truck stop, and the pump number would be 187. My room number at a motel would be 187, even though the motel only had 80 rooms. I tried to ignore it. Confirmation bias, I told myself. The brain is pattern-seeking. I was seeing 187 everywhere because I was looking for it, not because there was any real significance to it. But then the radio started acting up again. I was hauling a load of furniture from Boise to Salt Lake City, a straightforward run I'd done dozens of times before. It was early evening, the sun just starting to set, and I was making good time. I had a classic rock station on, playing at a low volume just to fill the silence. The song was Hotel California by the Eagles. I remember that specifically because of what happened next. The music started to slow down. Not dramatically, just enough that I noticed. Like someone was gradually adjusting a pitch control. The vocals became deeper, stretched out. Don Henley's voice turned into a low, distorted rumble. I reached for the radio to change the station, but before I could touch it, the music cut out entirely. For a moment, there was nothing but silence. Then the static came, that familiar hiss of dead air. And then the voice. Mile 187. Return what you took. My hands tightened on the wheel. I stared at the radio, watching the digital display flicker and jump between frequencies. I hadn't taken anything. I'd barely stopped at mile 187, just long enough to check the abandoned truck and read that logbook. The logbook. My stomach went cold. The logbook. I'd taken the logbook from the abandoned truck. I'd brought it with me, thinking maybe I could use it to figure out what had happened to the driver, maybe help identify him somehow. It was sitting in my sleeper cabin right now, tucked into the side pocket of my duffel bag. Return what you took, the voice said again, and this time I could hear something underneath it. Another sound barely audible beneath the static. It sounded like wind, or rushing water, or maybe voices, many voices, all speaking at once. I changed lanes abruptly, pulling onto the shoulder. My heart was racing, my breath coming in short gasps. The radio continued to hiss with static, and underneath it, that chorus of voices grew louder. I twisted the volume knob to 0, then reached down and physically unplugged the radio from its power source. The display went dark. The static stopped, but I could still hear it, faint, distant, like it was coming from somewhere behind me. I turned in my seat, looking back at the sleeper cabin. The curtain that separated it from the cab was closed, and for a moment, I was absolutely certain that if I opened it, I would find something waiting for me. Not the logbook. Something else. I forced myself to get up, to pull back the curtain. The sleeper cabin was empty, of course. Just my duffel bag, my sleeping bag, a few personal items scattered around. Nothing out of the ordinary. I grabbed the duffel bag and pulled out the logbook. It looked the same as it had when I'd taken it. Worn, brown leather cover, pages yellowed with age. I flipped it open to the last entry, the one written in that frantic handwriting. Mile 187. Can't get past mile 187. Radio keeps repeating. Same stretch of road. Same mile marker. Have been driving for 6 hours. Fuel gauge not moving. This isn't right. This isn't... I read it again, more carefully this time. Something about the words bothered me, but I couldn't quite put my finger on what. Then I noticed it. The handwriting wasn't the same throughout the entry. The first few lines were neat, controlled, but as the entry went on, the handwriting deteriorated, becoming messier, more frantic. By the last line, it was barely legible. The letters pressed so hard into the paper that they'd almost torn through. But there was something else, something I hadn't noticed before. There was another line below the one I'd read. So faint, I'd missed it the first time, written in pencil instead of pen. Don't listen to the radio. I stared at those words, feeling ice water flood through my veins. Don't listen to the radio. That's what Dale Morrison had written, or whoever had been driving that truck. They'd figured something out, realized something important, and their last act before whatever happened to them had been to write that warning. Don't listen to the radio. I thought about unplugging my radio, leaving it disconnected. But I knew it wouldn't matter. The voice would find another way to reach me. It had already proven that. This wasn't about the radio itself. It was about something else, something I was only beginning to understand. I sat there on the shoulder of I-84, watching the sun sink below the horizon, trying to decide what to do. Part of me wanted to burn the logbook, destroy it, pretend I'd never found it. But another part of me knew that wouldn't solve anything. The connection had already been made. Taking the logbook had been just the final link in a chain that had started the moment I drove through mile 187. A semi roared past me, the blast of wind rocking my truck. I watched its taillights recede into the distance, envying the driver. They were just going about their business, hauling their load, thinking about nothing more complicated than making their delivery on time and finding a decent meal. I used to be like that. Before mile 187. I decided I needed to talk to someone who might understand. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts until I found the number for Carl Atwood, the older driver I'd talked to at the truck stop in Portland. He'd mentioned experiencing something similar on Route 97. If anyone could help me make sense of this, it would be him. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up. Yeah? His voice was rough, cautious. Carl, it's Mason Briggs. We talked about... I remember, he said, cutting me off. There was a long pause. You're calling about mile 187. How did you know? Because you wouldn't be calling otherwise. What happened? I told him everything. The abandoned truck, the logbook, the voice on the radio, the numbers following me, the message telling me to return what I'd taken. When I finished, there was another long silence. You still have the logbook? Carl asked finally. Yeah. Get rid of it. What? Get rid of it, he repeated, more forcefully. Burn it, bury it, throw it in a river, I don't care, but get it away from you as soon as possible. Carl, what is this? What's happening? He sighed, a sound of exhaustion and resignation. I don't know exactly what it is, but I know that place, That stretch of road, it's not right. It's not like other dead zones. It's more than just bad cell reception. It's a hole, Mason, a hole in the world. And sometimes things fall through and sometimes things come out. What kind of things? I don't know. But whatever's there, it doesn't like being disturbed. When you took that logbook, you took something that belonged to it, something it wants back. What happens if I don't give it back? Another pause. When Carl spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. You ever wonder what happened to all those truckers who've gone missing over the years? The ones who just vanish without a trace? Their trucks found abandoned on some lonely stretch of highway? I felt my mouth go dry. I think mile 187 is hungry, Carl said. I think it takes people, and I think it's been doing it for a long time. And I think the only reason you got away is because you left before it could really get its hooks into you. But now you've given it something to hold on to. That logbook is a link, Mason, a connection. And as long as you have it, that place can reach you. Then I'll take it back, I said. I'll drive back to mile 187 and leave it there. No. Carl's voice was sharp. Don't go back there. Whatever you do, don't go back. That's exactly what it wants. It's baiting you, trying to get you to return. If you go back, you won't leave, not like before. Then what do I do? Get rid of the logbook some other way, anywhere but there. And after that, you stay away from Route 97. You stay away from dead zones. You stay away from anywhere that feels even slightly wrong. You hear me? I hear you. Good. And Mason, if you start seeing things, if you start hearing things when there's no explanation for them, you call me immediately. Day or night. Understand? Yeah. Thanks, Carl. He hung up without saying goodbye. I sat there holding my phone, staring at the logbook in my other hand. Part of me wanted to follow Carl's advice immediately, to pull over at the next rest stop and throw the damn thing in a dumpster. But another part of me was curious. What was it about this particular logbook that made it important? What had Dale Morrison known or seen that made whatever inhabited mile 187 so desperate to keep it? I flipped through the pages again, looking for anything I might have missed. Most of it was standard logbook entries, dates, times, locations, cargo details. But as I got closer to that final entry, I noticed something strange. The dates didn't match up. According to the logbook, Dale Morrison had been driving for 3 days straight when he wrote that last entry. But the date on the final page was January 15th, 2019. The entry before it was dated January 12th. He'd lost a day. Somewhere between January 12th and January 15th, a full 24 hours had simply vanished from his timeline. I thought about my own missing 2 hours, the discrepancy in my logbook that I'd never been able to explain. Time moved differently in mile 187. Or maybe it didn't move at all. Maybe that's what the repeating mile markers meant. You weren't traveling forward. You were stuck, driving in circles through the same moment over and over again. And if you stayed too long, if you didn't get out when you had the chance, maybe you'd never get out at all. I was about to close the logbook when I noticed something else. On the inside back cover, written in the same pencil as that final warning, were a series of numbers. 38.9 85, 120, 6543 coordinates. I pulled out my phone and typed them into a mapping app. It took a moment to load, and when it did, my blood ran cold. The coordinates pointed to a location just off Route 97, almost exactly at mile 187. But it wasn't marking the road itself. It was marking something about half a mile east of the highway, out in the desert. I zoomed in on the map, trying to see what was there, but the satellite image was strange. It looked like someone had taken an eraser to the photograph. The area around the coordinates was blurred and indistinct, like the image had been corrupted or deliberately obscured. I tried switching to different map views, but they all showed the same thing. That small area of desert was a blank spot, a place where the map couldn't or wouldn't show what was there. Dale Morrison had written down those coordinates. He'd found something, or maybe he'd been trying to mark the location for someone else to find. But what was it? My phone buzzed with an incoming text. I glanced at the screen, expecting a message from my dispatcher or maybe a friend. Instead, I saw a number I didn't recognize. The message was short. "Don't go there." I stared at it, feeling my skin crawl. Who was texting me? How did they know what I was thinking? Before I could respond, another message came through. "The coordinates. Don't go there, trust me." I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, showing that whoever it was typing a response. They stayed there for almost a minute, then disappeared without any message being sent. Then one final text came through. "Someone who made the same mistake you did." The number went dead after that. When I tried to call it back, I got a recorded message saying it was no longer in service. When I tried to look up the number online, nothing came up. It was as if it had never existed. I sat there in my truck as the last light faded from the sky, trying to make sense of everything. The logbook, the coordinates, the mysterious text messages, it all pointed to something being out there in the desert near mile 187, something important enough that people had tried to warn me away from it. But what? I thought about Carl's advice to stay away, to get rid of the logbook and forget any of this had ever happened. That would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But I've never been good at leaving mysteries unsolved. And despite the fear, despite the warnings, I found myself wondering what would happen if I went back. If I found whatever was at those coordinates, would it answer my questions? Would it explain what mile 187 really was? Or would I end up like Dale Morrison, writing frantic warnings in a logbook that no one would read until it was too late? I started the truck's engine, listening to it rumble to life. I sat there with my hand on the gear shift, trying to decide. East toward Salt Lake City and my scheduled delivery, continuing my route, forgetting about all of this. Or south, back toward Route 97, toward mile 187, toward whatever was waiting in that blank spot on the map. A car passed by on the highway, its headlights sweeping across my windshield. In that brief flash of light, I caught sight of something in my rearview mirror. There was a figure standing at the back of my trailer. I spun around, but when I looked out the back window, there was nothing there. Just the empty highway stretching out behind me, lit by the orange glow of the streetlights. I turned back around, heart hammering, and checked the side mirrors. Nothing. The highway was empty, I was alone, but I knew what I'd seen. Just for that split second, in the reflection, there had been someone standing there. A man in trucker's clothes, his face obscured by shadow. My radio, still unplugged, crackled with static. "Return what you took," the voice said, and this time I could hear the anger in it. Or take its place. I threw the truck into gear and pulled back onto the highway heading east. Away from Route 97, away from mile 187, away from whatever was hunting me. But even as I drove, putting mile after mile between myself and that cursed stretch of road, I knew it wouldn't be enough. I'd crossed a line when I took that logbook. I'd connected myself to mile 187 in a way I didn't fully understand. And sooner or later, I was going to have to go back. Not because I wanted to, but because something in that dead zone had decided I belonged there, and it was calling me home. I tried to destroy the logbook 3 times. The first time was 2 days after my conversation with Carl. I pulled into a rest stop outside of Elko, Nevada, and threw the logbook into a dumpster. I poured half a bottle of lighter fluid on it and dropped in a match. I watched it burn, the pages curling and blackening, Dale Morrison's frantic handwriting disappearing into ash. I felt relieved, lighter, like I'd finally cut the connection between myself and that cursed stretch of highway. That feeling lasted exactly 4 hours. I was driving through the darkness on I-80, making my way toward Reno, when my GPS started acting up. The screen flickered, the route lines disappearing and reappearing. Then, without warning, the display changed completely. It was showing Route 97, showing mile 187. And according to the GPS, I was there. Right now. Despite the fact that I was actually 200 miles north on a completely different highway. The radio turned itself on. I hadn't touched it. It was still unplugged from the power source, the wires hanging loose behind the dashboard. But the speakers crackled to life anyway, and that familiar voice spoke through them. "You can't destroy it," the voice said. "It's already part of you." I jerked the wheel, nearly swerving into the next lane. The GPS flickered again, and when it stabilized, it was showing my actual location on I-80. The radio went silent, but when I pulled over and checked my sleeper cabin, the logbook was there, sitting on my duffel bag, exactly where it had been before I'd thrown it away, completely intact. No burn marks, no smell of lighter fluid. Just the same worn brown leather cover and yellowed pages. I picked it up with shaking hands and flipped to the last entry. The words were the same, but there was something new written at the bottom of the page, in handwriting that looked uncomfortably similar to my own. "You can't leave until you understand." The second time I tried to get rid of it was in Winnemucca. I drove to a bridge over the Humboldt River and threw the logbook into the water. I watched it sink beneath the surface, carried away by the current. I found it in my truck 3 hours later. The third time, I took it to a truck stop and asked the attendant to mail it to an address I made up. I watched him put it in an envelope, watched him put the envelope in the outgoing mail bin. I even tipped him $20 to make sure it got processed that day. It was back in my sleeper cabin before I reached the Nevada state line. That's when I finally accepted what Carl had been trying to tell me. The logbook wasn't just a physical object anymore. It was a connection, a thread linking me to mile 187. And as long as that connection existed, I would never be free of it. I needed to understand what was at those coordinates, what Dale Morrison had found out there in the desert. It took me 3 weeks to work up the courage to go back. 3 weeks of driving my normal routes, trying to pretend everything was fine, all while the logbook sat in my truck like a ticking bomb. 3 weeks of hearing that voice on the radio, seeing that figure in my mirrors, feeling the weight of mile 187 pulling at me like gravity. Finally, on a cold morning in late February, I made my decision. I called my dispatcher and told him I needed a week off for personal reasons. Then I loaded up my truck with supplies, water, food, a full tank of gas, and a few items I thought I might need for whatever I was about to find. I also brought a camera. If I was going to do this, I wanted proof, documentation, something that would help me make sense of what I was about to experience. The drive to Route 97 took most of the day. I approached from the north this time, taking secondary highways to avoid the major interstates. I didn't want any distractions, didn't want to give myself any excuse to turn back. As I got closer, the landscape became more desolate. The towns grew smaller and farther apart until there was nothing but empty desert stretching out in all directions. The sky was overcast, a flat gray that made the world look washed out and faded. I reached Route 97 just as the sun was setting. I'd timed it that way deliberately. I didn't want to approach mile 187 in the darkness, but I also didn't want to be there during the brightest part of the day. Something about dusk felt right for this. Appropriate. As I drove south on 97, I paid close attention to the mile markers. They counted up normally at first. Mile 180, mile 181, mile 182. Everything proceeding exactly as it should. Then I saw mile 187. This time, I was ready for it. I'd prepared myself for the repetition, for the sense of wrongness. But what I wasn't prepared for was how it would feel different than before. Last time, the dead zone had felt almost predatory, like something was watching me, hunting me. This time, it felt expectant, like it had been waiting for me to return. My radio stayed silent. My GPS continued to function normally. There was no voice, no warnings, no glitching displays. If I hadn't known better, I might have thought this was just an ordinary stretch of highway. But I did know better. And I knew that this calm was worse than any overt threat. This was the dead zone welcoming me back. I slowed down, watching the shoulder for a place to pull off. The coordinates Dale Morrison had written down pointed to a location about half a mile east of the highway. I'd need to leave the truck and hike out there. I found a spot where the shoulder widened slightly and pulled over. I left the engine running. The last thing I wanted was to be stranded out here with a dead battery, and gathered my supplies. Flashlight, water, the camera, and the logbook. I hesitated over the last item, but in the end I brought it with me. It had led me here. I might need it to understand what I was about to find. The desert was quiet as I climbed down from the truck. No wind, no animals, no sound except my boots on the gravel. The air had a strange quality to it, thick and heavy despite the coolness of the evening. It reminded me of how the air feels right before a thunderstorm, charged with potential energy. I checked my phone's compass and started walking east, away from the highway. The ground was rough, covered in scrub brush and loose rocks. I moved carefully, watching my footing, sweeping my flashlight beam back and forth across the terrain. I'd been walking for about 10 minutes when I noticed something strange. The GPS on my phone was having trouble maintaining a fix. My position kept jumping around, sometimes showing me miles away from where I actually was, sometimes showing me as standing right on Route 97, despite the fact that I could still see the highway in the distance behind me. I consulted the compass instead, trusting the magnetic needle more than the satellite signals. East. Just keep going east. After another 15 minutes, I saw it. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the fading light. A shadow, maybe, or a particularly dark patch of ground. But as I got closer, I realized it was something else entirely. There was a depression in the desert floor. A roughly circular area, maybe 30 feet across, where the ground seemed to have sunk down about 6 inches below the surrounding terrain. The dirt inside the depression was darker, almost black, and nothing grew there. No sagebrush, no grass, not even weeds. It looked like a burn mark, like something had scorched the earth so thoroughly that nothing would ever grow there again. I approached slowly, feeling that same sense of wrongness I'd felt at mile 187. The air was colder here, and I could see my breath misting in front of my face. My flashlight beam seemed weaker somehow, like the darkness was thicker here, harder to penetrate. I stepped into the depression, and immediately felt a wave of vertigo wash over me. The ground felt unstable beneath my feet, like I was standing on something soft and yielding instead of solid earth. In the center of the depression was a hole. It wasn't large, maybe 2 feet across, but it was deep. I shined my flashlight down into it, but the beam didn't penetrate far before being swallowed by absolute darkness. I couldn't see the bottom. I knelt down next to the hole, trying to understand what I was looking at. The edges were perfectly smooth, almost glassy, like the earth had been melted rather than dug. The air coming up from below was cold and carried a smell I couldn't identify. Something between ozone and decay. I pulled out the logbook and flipped to the page with the coordinates. In the beam of my flashlight, I could see that there was more writing below the numbers, so faint I'd missed it before. I had to hold the page close to my eyes to make it out. This is where it comes from. This is the source. Don't let it spread. I looked back at the hole, feeling ice water in my veins. The source of what? What had Dale Morrison discovered out here? I pulled out my camera and started taking pictures. The depression, the hole, the surrounding desert. I documented everything, trying to create a record that someone else could find when, something happened to me. That's when I heard the sound. It was faint at first, barely audible over my own breathing. A kind of static sound, like white noise coming from the hole. I leaned closer, trying to hear better, and realized it wasn't just static. There were voices in it. Many voices, all speaking at once, their words overlapping and blending together into an incomprehensible wall of sound. I pulled back, my heart racing. The voices continued, growing slightly louder. I could almost make out individual words now. Numbers, mostly. Coordinates, mile markers, times, dates, all jumbled together in a constant stream. And underneath it all, that familiar voice. Mile 187, mile 187, mile 187. I stood up, backing away from the hole. This was a mistake. I shouldn't have come here. Carl had been right. Whatever this place was, it wasn't meant to be found. Wasn't meant to be disturbed. The voices grew louder, more distinct, and I realized with growing horror that I recognized some of them. There was Dale Morrison's voice saying the same words over and over. This isn't right, this isn't right, this isn't right. There was another voice, unfamiliar, but speaking in the cadence of a CB radio transmission. Breaker, breaker. I'm stuck at mile 187. I can't get past mile 187. Is anyone there? And there were others. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. All of them truckers, all of them describing the same experience. Getting stuck at mile 187, losing time, hearing voices, seeing things that shouldn't be there. They were all still there, all still trapped, their voices bleeding through from whatever place they'd fallen into. I turned to run, but something made me stop. A new voice had joined the chorus. This one was different, clearer, more present. It was Carl Atwood. "Mason," his voice called out from the hole. "Mason, is that you? I'm stuck. I can't get out. I've been driving for days, but I'm still at mile 187. You have to help me. You have to—" "No," I said out loud, backing away. "No, that's not possible. I just talked to Carl. He's fine. He's not—" "That was weeks ago," Carl's voice said. And I realized it was true. It had been weeks since I'd talked to him. I'd been so focused on planning this trip that I hadn't even thought to check in. "I came back, Mason. I came back to mile 187 because I thought I could help. I thought I could figure out what this place was. But I was wrong. It's a trap. It's always been a trap. And now I'm—" His voice dissolved into static, joining the chorus of other voices in the hole. I ran. I didn't think, didn't look back, just ran as fast as I could back toward the highway. Behind me, I could hear the voices growing louder, spilling out of the hole, filling the desert with their desperate cries. I didn't know if they were real or hallucinations, if Carl was really trapped at mile 187, or if the dead zone was just using his voice to get to me. I didn't care. I just needed to get away. I reached my truck and threw myself into the cab, slamming the door behind me. I threw it into gear and pulled back onto the highway, tires squealing on the asphalt. I didn't look at the mile markers as I drove. I didn't check my GPS. I just drove north, pushing the speedometer past 90, desperate to put distance between myself and that hole in the desert. It wasn't until I saw the sign for Likely, the town I'd passed through on my first trip, that I allowed myself to slow down. I pulled into the same gas station, the same one where the young attendant had given me that strange warning. He wasn't there. Instead, there was an older woman behind the counter. When I went inside to pay for gas, she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You look like you've seen something you shouldn't have," she said. I tried to laugh it off. Just tired, long day. She shook her head. "No, I know that look. You went out to the dead zone, didn't you? Out to mile 187? I froze. "How do you—" "Because people come through here all the time," she said. "Truckers, mostly. They hear stories about mile 187, and they get curious. They want to see it for themselves. Some of them come back, some of them don't." "What is it?" I asked. "What's out there?" She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "My husband was a trucker, drove Route 97 for 30 years. He told me once that the desert is full of thin places. Places where the world isn't as solid as it should be, where something else can bleed through. Something else. He didn't know what to call it. Maybe it doesn't have a name. Maybe it doesn't need one. All he knew was that mile 187 was the thinnest place he'd ever found. A spot where reality got so thin you could fall right through if you weren't careful. He disappeared 10 years ago," she said. "Was supposed to make a run to Bakersfield, never arrived. They found his truck on the shoulder at mile 187. Empty. Keys still in the ignition. No sign of where he'd gone." I felt sick. "I'm sorry," she shrugged. "I'm used to it now. But I'll tell you what I tell everyone who comes through here with that look in their eyes. Whatever you saw out there, whatever you heard, you need to forget about it. Don't go back. Don't talk about it. Don't even think about it if you can help it. Because every time you do, you make the connection stronger. You make it easier for that place to reach you." "What if it's too late?" I asked. "What if the connection's already there?" She looked at me with sad, knowing eyes. "Then you drive. You keep driving and you never stop. Because the moment you stop moving, the moment you stand still, that's when it'll catch you." I thanked her and left, her words echoing in my head. Keep driving. Never stop. I got back in my truck and started the engine. I sat there for a moment, trying to decide where to go, what to do next. I couldn't go back to my normal routes, couldn't pretend that everything was fine. Not anymore. That's when I noticed the logbook sitting on the passenger seat. I'd left it out in the desert. I was certain of it. I'd dropped it when I ran, left it lying next to that hole in the ground. But here it was, back in my truck. I picked it up with trembling hands and flipped to the last page. There was new writing there, in that same handwriting that looked too much like my own. "You can't run forever." I closed the logbook and threw it out the window, watched it tumble across the parking lot. Then I pulled out of the gas station and headed north, keeping my eyes fixed on the road ahead. I've been driving ever since. That was 6 months ago. I haven't stopped for more than a few hours at a time. I sleep in my truck when I have to, take short naps at rest stops, but I never settle down, never stay in one place too long, because I can feel it. That pull, that gravity of mile 187. It's always there now, a constant weight at the back of my mind. Sometimes stronger, sometimes weaker, but never gone completely. The logbook keeps coming back. No matter how many times I throw it away, burn it, destroy it, it reappears. New pages are being added now, entries I don't remember writing, but that are definitely in my handwriting. I'm losing time again. Hours at first, then days. I'll look at my watch and realize that I've been driving for 16 hours straight, but can only account for 10 of them. I'll check my GPS and see that I've covered 300 miles, but only remember the last 100. And the voices on the radio are getting clearer, more insistent. I hear them even when the radio's off, even when I'm outside the truck. They're calling to me, telling me to come back, to return to mile 187, to finally understand what's waiting there. Sometimes I see other trucks on the highway, and I wonder if they're real or if they're echoes. Ghosts of other drivers who got trapped in the dead zone and are still driving, still trying to escape. I've tried calling Carl's number, but it's been disconnected. I've tried searching for news about him, but there's nothing. It's like he never existed. Or maybe he did exist, but he's been erased somehow. Written out of the world the same way he was written out of mile 187. I think I understand now what that hole in the desert is. It's not just a thin place, it's a wound. A tear in reality where something else is bleeding through. And mile 187 is the visible symptom, the place where that wound has infected the world around it. How far does it spread? Is it just that one stretch of highway, or is it growing? The woman at the gas station said her husband disappeared 10 years ago. But Dale Morrison died in January 2019, just a few months before my first encounter. How many others have been taken in that time? I'm writing this down because I need someone to know. I need there to be a record of what's happening, what's been happening for who knows how long on Route 97. Maybe someone will find this and understand. Maybe someone smarter than me, braver than me, will be able to figure out how to stop it. Or maybe this will just be another warning that gets ignored, another story that people dismiss as the ravings of a tired trucker who's been on the road too long. I don't know how much longer I can keep driving. The pull is getting stronger. Some nights I wake up and realize I've been steering toward Route 97 in my sleep, my hands moving on their own, guiding the truck back to mile 187. It wants me to come back. It's been patient, but its patience is running out. And the terrible thing is, part of me wants to go. Part of me is tired of running, tired of fighting. Part of me just wants to understand, to finally know what's waiting in that dead zone. Maybe that's how it gets you in the end. Not through force, but through exhaustion. Through the slow erosion of your will to resist. If you're reading this, if you've found this somehow, do me a favor. Stay away from Route 97. Stay away from mile 187. And if you do find yourself there, if you hear that voice on the radio, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't investigate. Don't try to understand. Just drive. Because once you start asking questions, once you start looking for answers, the dead zone will never let you go. I know that now. I've known it for a while. I think I've always known it. Ever since that first night when I drove through mile 187 and lost 2 hours I'll never get back. The woman at the gas station was right. The moment you stop moving is when it catches you. So I keep moving. I keep driving. Mile after mile, hour after hour, day after day. But I'm getting tired. And mile 187 is getting closer. I can feel it. I'm back at mile 187. I don't remember deciding to come here. I don't remember turning the truck around, don't remember the drive south on Route 97. But here I am, parked on the shoulder at mile 187, with the engine idling and the sun rising behind me. The logbook is open on my lap. The last entry is dated today. The handwriting is mine, but I don't remember writing it. It's time to stop running. I should be scared. I should throw the truck in gear and drive away as fast as I can. But I'm not scared anymore. I'm just tired, so incredibly tired. I turn off the engine. The sudden silence is absolute. No wind, no distant traffic, no birds, just silence, pressing in from all sides. I climb down from the cab, leaving the keys in the ignition. The desert stretches out around me, brown and empty and infinite. The sun is just starting to peek over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. It's beautiful in its way, peaceful. I start walking east, back toward that depression in the desert, that hole in the ground where all those voices live. I don't need my GPS this time. I know exactly where I'm going. My footsteps crunch on the gravel, one foot in front of the other. It's easy, really. Just keep walking. Just keep moving forward. The depression appears ahead of me, that scorched circle of earth. I walk to the edge and look down at the hole in the center. The voices are there, waiting. I can hear them clearly now, all those truckers who came before me, all those people who got lost in the dead zone. They're not screaming anymore. They sound almost peaceful, like they've accepted where they are. I sit down at the edge of the hole and pull out the logbook one last time. I flip through the pages reading all those entries. Dale Morrison's frantic words. My own confused observations. The warnings that no one heeded. On the last page, I write one final entry. My hands are steady. The handwriting is clear and precise. To whoever finds this, Mile 187 isn't a place, it's a moment, a single moment, repeated forever. Once you're in it, you never leave. You just keep experiencing it, over and over, driving the same stretch of road, seeing the same mile marker, hearing the same voice on the radio. I don't know why it exists. I don't know what created it or what purpose it serves. Maybe it's a natural phenomenon, some quantum glitch in the fabric of reality. Maybe it's something else, something older and stranger than we can understand. It doesn't matter anymore. What matters is this. If you're reading this, if you've found this logbook, it means I'm already gone. It means I'm part of Mile 187 now, just another voice in the static. Don't try to help me. Don't try to figure out what happened. Just take this as your warning. Stay away from Route 97. Stay away from Mile 187. And if you ever hear a voice on your radio saying those words, those 3 simple words that repeat forever, just keep driving. Don't stop. Don't look back. And maybe, just maybe, you'll escape the dead zone before it claims you too. Mile 187. That's where I am. That's where I've always been. That's where I'll always be. I close the logbook and set it down on the ground beside me. Then I stand up and look back toward the highway, toward my truck sitting on the shoulder with its emergency flashers blinking. From this distance, it looks exactly like the abandoned truck I found on that first night. Same position, same angle, same open door revealing an empty cab. How long has that truck been there? Hours? Days? Years? Time doesn't work right at Mile 187. I know that now. That truck has always been there and will always be there, a permanent fixture of this cursed place, waiting for the next driver to find it and start asking questions. I turn back to the hole. The voices are calling my name now, welcoming me. There's no fear in their tones, no desperation, just acceptance. "Mason," they say. "Mason Briggs, we've been waiting for you. It's time to join us. It's time to stop fighting." I take a step closer to the edge of the hole. The ground feels soft beneath my feet, unstable. The darkness below is absolute, but I can see movement in it. Shapes forming and dissolving, patterns that my eyes can't quite focus on. "This is the source," Dale Morrison's voice says from the darkness. "This is where the dead zone begins. This is where we all end up, sooner or later. I think about Carl's warning, about the woman at the gas station, about all the people who tried to help me, who tried to keep me away from this place. They were right to be afraid, but they were wrong about one thing. You can't escape mile 187 by running. You can't escape it by destroying the logbook or changing your route or refusing to listen to the radio. Once it has you, it never lets go. It just bides its time, waiting for the moment when you're too tired to fight anymore, when the pull becomes too strong to resist. That moment is now. I close my eyes and take a step forward, into the hole, into the darkness where all those voices are waiting. The fall is longer than I expected. Or maybe it's not a fall at all. Maybe I'm not moving at all. Maybe I'm just standing on the edge of the hole, frozen in a single moment that will last forever. Mile 187. That's where I am. That's where I've always been. That's where I'll always be. The voices surround me now, welcoming me into their eternal chorus. I try to speak, to add my own voice to theirs, but the words won't come. Or maybe they do come, but they're lost in the static, indistinguishable from all the others. I understand now. I understand what Dale Morrison was trying to warn me about, what Carl couldn't explain, what that woman at the gas station had seen in her husband's eyes before he disappeared. Mile 187 isn't just a location. It's a state of being, a trap made of moments and miles and the space between radio signals. Once you're in it, you're always in it. You can drive away. You can put hundreds of miles between yourself and that stretch of highway, but you never really leave. You're always at mile 187. You always have been. You always will be. The darkness is complete now. I can't see anything, can't feel anything except the cold. But I can hear the voices, all of them, and I realize something that makes my blood freeze. They're not just voices of the past. They're voices of the future, too. Drivers who haven't come to mile 187 yet, who are still out there on the highways, thinking they're safe, thinking they're free. But they're already here. Just like I was always here, even before that first night when I drove through the dead zone. We're all here, all of us who have ever driven or will ever drive Route 97. Time doesn't exist at mile 187. It's all happening at once. Every truck that's ever been abandoned on this highway, every driver who's ever heard that voice on the radio, every mile marker that's ever repeated itself, it's all happening simultaneously in a single, eternal moment. And I'm part of it now. I try to remember what came before, my life, my roots, the years I spent on the road before mile 187. But the memories are fading, becoming static, dissolving into the chorus of voices. There's only one thing that remains clear, one thought that cuts through the darkness and the cold. If you're reading this, if you've somehow found this logbook, you're probably wondering if any of it's real. You're probably trying to rationalize it, to find an explanation that makes sense. Don't. Just know this. I'm writing this now, in this moment, from inside mile 187. And I'm also writing this 5 years from now, and 5 years ago, and every moment in between. Because time is broken here, and I exist in all of those moments at once. I'm in your radio static. I'm in the glitch on your GPS. I'm in the reflection in your mirror that doesn't quite match reality. And if you ever find yourself on Route 97, driving through the high desert, and you see a mile marker that repeats, or hear a voice on your radio that sounds familiar, or lose time that you can't account for, that's me. That's all of us. That's every driver who got trapped in the dead zone, trying to warn you, trying to help you escape the fate that we couldn't avoid. Listen to us. Drive faster. Don't stop. Because mile 187 is always hungry. And it's always waiting. 3 months later, a state trooper found an abandoned Peterbilt on the shoulder of Route 97, just south of Likely, California. The location was mile 187. The keys were in the ignition, the engine was cold, and the cab was empty. On the passenger seat was a logbook, open to the last entry. The handwriting became increasingly erratic toward the end, the final lines barely legible. The trooper filed his report and had the truck towed to an impound lot. The logbook was cataloged as evidence and stored in a box at the sheriff's office. No one ever claimed the truck. The driver, Mason Briggs, was never found. His dispatcher reported that the last time anyone had heard from him was 3 months earlier, when he'd called to request time off. Cell phone records showed that his phone had been in the area of Route 97 around the time of his disappearance, but there were gaps in the data. Periods where his phone had no signal at all, dead zones that lasted for hours. The investigation was eventually closed due to lack of evidence. The sheriff's department concluded that Mason Briggs had probably wandered off into the desert and died of exposure, though they couldn't explain why he would have left his truck or where he might have been going. The logbook stayed in that evidence box for 2 years before it was finally cleared out during a records purge. Someone, no one remembers who, threw it in the trash. But if you're a trucker, if you drive the long hauls through the empty places, you might hear the story. You might hear about mile 187, about the dead zone on Route 97, about the drivers who disappeared. Most people don't believe it. They say it's just an urban legend, a story truckers tell each other to pass the time on long drives. But sometimes, late at night, when you're driving through the desert with nothing but the road ahead and the darkness behind, your radio might pick up something. A voice in the static, barely audible, but unmistakably there. Mile 187. And if you check your GPS just for a second, you might see your position jump. You might see yourself standing on Route 97, at a location you've never been to, in a moment that hasn't happened yet. Or maybe it's happening right now. Maybe it's always been happening. Maybe you've always been at mile 187, and you just didn't know it yet. The trucker who found this logbook, who took the time to read it, who's reading these final words right now, you're already there. You're already part of it. Welcome home. Mile 187, we've been waiting for you. My name is Wyatt Dalton, and I've been hauling freight across the western states for 19 years. In that time, I've driven just about every highway, back road, and forgotten stretch of asphalt you can imagine. I know these routes like I know my own face in the mirror. Every curve, every grade, every place where the road narrows or the shoulder drops off. That's why what happened in March of 2018 shouldn't have been possible. I was running a load of agricultural equipment from Fresno, California, up to Boise, Idaho. It was a straightforward job, the kind I'd done 100 times before. Take Highway 99 north through the Central Valley, connect to I-5, then cut east on smaller highways through Oregon to reach Idaho. 2 days of driving, maybe less if the weather held and traffic was light. The first day went exactly as planned. I made it through California and into Oregon without incident. Stopped for the night at a truck stop outside Klamath Falls, got a decent meal and 6 hours of sleep. By the time I started driving again the next morning, I was feeling good. Alert, focused, ready to finish the run. The route I'd planned would take me through some pretty remote country in eastern Oregon. Not many people realize just how empty that part of the state is. Everyone thinks of Oregon as green and rainy, full of forests and mountains. And the western part is like that. But once you cross the Cascades and head east, it's a different world. High desert, sagebrush, long stretches of nothing punctuated by small towns that barely qualify as dots on a map. I prefer it that way, honestly. The solitude suits me. No traffic to worry about, no construction zones, no aggressive drivers trying to cut you off. Just you, the truck, and the road stretching out to the horizon. I left Klamath Falls around 6 in the morning, just as the sun was coming up. The air was cold but clear, the sky that pale blue that promises good weather. I grabbed coffee and a breakfast burrito at a gas station and headed east on Highway 140. The first few hours were uneventful. The landscape gradually changed from the pine forests around Klamath Falls to the more arid terrain of the high desert. The road rose and fell with the contours of the land, passing through valleys and over ridges. Traffic was light, just the occasional car or pickup truck going the opposite direction. Around 9 in the morning, I was approaching the tiny town of Lakeview. I'd been through it before, knew there wasn't much there. A few gas stations, a couple of diners, maybe 1,000 people total. I wasn't planning to stop, but I checked my fuel gauge out of habit. 3/4 full. Plenty to make it to my next planned stop in Burns, another 100 miles or so to the north. I passed through Lakeview without incident and continued north on Highway 395. The road here was straight and flat, cutting through an ancient lake bed that had dried up thousands of years ago. To the east, I could see the Warner Mountains rising up from the desert floor. To the west, more desert, more emptiness. I had the radio on, scanning through stations. Out here, you don't get much. A country station from somewhere in Nevada, fading in and out. A religious station broadcasting from God knows where. Mostly just static. I eventually gave up and turned it off, content to drive in silence. That's when I noticed the mile markers weren't matching up with my GPS. It was subtle at first. According to my GPS, I should have been at mile marker 78. But the marker I passed said 82, 4 miles off. I frowned, wondering if I'd miscalculated somehow, or if the GPS had glitched. These things happen out in the desert where satellite reception can be spotty. I kept driving, paying closer attention now. The next marker said 83. My GPS said I was at mile 79. The discrepancy was growing. I slowed down slightly, checking the GPS more carefully. The screen showed me exactly where I should be, the blue line of Highway 395 stretching north. But something was wrong. The mile markers kept increasing normally, but my position on the GPS barely seemed to be moving at all. Then I saw something that made me hit the brakes. There was a turnoff ahead. A paved road branching off to the east, marked with a faded green sign. The sign had a highway designation on it, but I couldn't make out the number from this distance. What caught my attention was that the turnoff wasn't on my GPS. The map showed Highway 395, continuing straight north with no intersections for another 30 miles. I slowed to about 20 miles an hour as I approached the turnoff. As I got closer, I could make out the sign more clearly. It read, Highway 78 East. Below that, in smaller letters, Denio 47 miles. I knew Highway 78. It ran through the far northeast corner of Nevada, connecting small towns in the middle of nowhere. But according to every map I'd ever seen, Highway 78 didn't connect to Highway 395. Not here, not anywhere in Oregon. The nearest intersection between the two highways was over 100 miles to the south. I pulled over onto the shoulder just past the turnoff and put the truck in park. I grabbed my road atlas from the passenger seat, the old paper kind that I still kept as a backup even in the GPS age. I flipped to the Oregon page and traced Highway 395 with my finger. No Highway 78 intersection. Nothing even close. I checked the Nevada page. Found Highway 78, followed it west. It dead-ended at the Oregon border, nowhere near where I was now. I looked up from the atlas and stared at the turnoff in my rearview mirror. The sign was there, clear as day, Highway 78 east. The pavement looked real, solid. I could see it extending eastward across the desert, a gray ribbon cutting through the brown landscape. But according to my maps, both paper and digital, it didn't exist. I considered just driving on, ignoring the turnoff and continuing north. But something about the situation bothered me. I've been driving long enough to trust my instincts, and my instincts were telling me that something was very wrong. I picked up my phone to call my dispatcher, thinking maybe there'd been some road construction, some new highway extension that hadn't made it onto the maps yet. But I had no signal. 0 bars. I wasn't surprised. Cell coverage in this part of Oregon was spotty at best. I climbed down from the cab and walked back to the turnoff. The morning sun was getting higher now, warming the air. A light breeze kicked up dust from the shoulder. Everything felt normal, ordinary. And yet, the sign looked old. The paint was faded, the metal weathered. It had clearly been here for years, maybe decades. This wasn't new construction. But if this highway had been here for that long, why wasn't it on any maps? I walked a few steps down Highway 78 studying the pavement. It was in poor condition, cracked and weathered, with weeds growing up through the gaps. But it was definitely a paved road, not just a dirt track or ranch access road. I could see the road stretching out across the desert, disappearing into the heat shimmer on the horizon. In the far distance, maybe 10 or 15 miles away, I could make out what looked like a line of trees. That would be unusual out here. Trees meant water, and water meant either a stream or human habitation. I stood there for a long time, maybe 10 minutes, trying to decide what to do. Every logical part of my brain said to get back in the truck and keep going north. This was just some mapping error, some old highway that had been decommissioned and removed from official maps. It happened sometimes, but there was another part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive and employed for 19 years, that was screaming at me to pay attention. That was telling me something about this situation was fundamentally wrong. I walked back to my truck and climbed into the cab. I sat there with the engine idling, staring at that turnoff in my side mirror. I should have driven away. I should have trusted my gut and gotten the hell out of there. Instead, I put the truck in gear, checked my mirrors, and made a U-turn. I pulled up to the turnoff and stopped, the nose of my truck pointing east down Highway 78. I told myself I'd just drive a few miles, see where it led, satisfy my curiosity. Then I'd turn around and get back on 395, back on my planned route. I'd only lose an hour, maybe less. The first sign that I'd made a mistake came as soon as I completed the turn. My GPS went haywire. The screen flickered, the map disappeared, replaced by a loading symbol that just spun and spun without resolving. Then the GPS shut off completely, the screen going black. I tried to restart it, but it wouldn't power on. I checked the connection, made sure the power cable was firmly plugged in. Everything looked fine, but the unit was dead. I told myself it was just a malfunction, a coincidence. GPS units fail sometimes. I had my paper atlas, I had the sun for navigation. I'd be fine. I started driving east on Highway 78. The road was rougher than Highway 395 had been. The pavement more cracked and uneven. I had to slow down to avoid the worst of the potholes. The truck bounced and rattled and I winced, thinking about the agricultural equipment in the trailer. It was supposed to be secured properly, but rough roads could loosen tie-downs, shift loads. The last thing I needed was to arrive in Boise with damaged cargo. But despite the poor condition of the road, it was clearly a real highway. I passed a mile marker about 5 minutes after making the turn. It read Highway 78 Mile 1. So, I was at the beginning of this stretch, wherever it led. The landscape on either side of the road was typical high desert. Sagebrush, dried grass, occasional rock formations. The mountains I'd seen from Highway 395 were now to my left, the north, gradually receding as I drove east. I checked my odometer, making a mental note of the mileage. I'd drive 10 miles, I decided. If I hadn't seen anything interesting or found an explanation for this unlisted highway by then, I'd turn around. The radio was still off, but I reached over and turned it on, curious if I'd be able to pick up any stations out here. The tuner scanned through the frequencies, finding nothing but static. Not surprising. I was probably in a dead zone, too far from any transmitters. But then, just as the tuner was about to cycle back to the beginning, it caught something. A voice, faint and distorted, speaking words I couldn't quite make out. I adjusted the tuner, trying to lock onto the signal, but it kept drifting. The voice would fade in for a moment, then disappear back into static. I couldn't tell if it was a radio station or a CB transmission or something else entirely. The words were unclear, but there was something about the cadence of the speech that seemed off. Too slow, maybe, or too regular, like someone reading from a script. I gave up trying to tune it in and turned the radio off. The silence that followed seemed heavier somehow, more oppressive. I found myself listening to the sounds of the truck, the rumble of the engine, the hiss of the tires on the rough pavement, the occasional creak and rattle from the trailer. I'd been driving for about 15 minutes when I saw the truck. It was parked on the shoulder ahead, maybe a quarter-mile distant. As I got closer, I could see it was a semi like mine, though older. The paint was faded, and even from a distance I could tell it had been sitting there for a while. The tires were flat, the trailer slightly tilted. I slowed down as I approached, looking for any sign of the driver. The cab appeared to be empty. As I drew even with it, I could see that the driver's door was open, hanging slightly ajar. I pulled over and stopped, putting my truck in park. Every instinct I had was telling me to keep driving, to not get involved, to not stop. But there's a code among truckers. If someone's in trouble, you help. That's just how it is. I grabbed my flashlight and climbed down from the cab. The air outside was warm now, the sun high enough that the desert was starting to heat up. I could hear the wind whistling through the sagebrush, a lonesome sound that seemed to emphasize the emptiness around me. I walked over to the abandoned truck slowly, cautiously. As I got closer, I could see the company name on the door, faded but still legible. Hardin Transport, Reno NV. Below that was a phone number with a 775 area code. I'd heard of Hardin Transport. They were a small outfit, mostly running regional loads in Nevada and Eastern California. But what was one of their trucks doing out here on a highway that didn't officially exist? I climbed up onto the step and looked inside the cab. It was empty, as I'd thought, but there were signs of recent occupation. A half-full coffee cup sat in the cup holder. A paperback book lay open on the passenger seat. The keys were still in the ignition. I tried to start the truck, but the battery was dead. No surprise there, if it had been sitting for days or weeks with the door open and the interior lights on. I climbed down and walked around to the trailer. The doors were closed but not locked. I opened them and shined my flashlight inside. Empty. Completely empty. Whatever this truck had been hauling, it was long gone. I stood there staring into the empty trailer, trying to make sense of the situation. A driver wouldn't just abandon a truck like this, not without a good reason. Mechanical failure. But the truck looked like it had just been parked, not broken down. Medical emergency. But then where was the driver? Where was the ambulance, the police report, any sign of what had happened? I walked around the truck one more time, looking for any clues. That's when I noticed the tracks. They were faint, barely visible in the hard-packed dirt of the shoulder. but they were there. Footprints leading away from the truck and into the desert, heading north. Just one set of prints, suggesting a single person walking alone. I followed the tracks with my eyes, trying to see where they led. They extended for maybe 20 or 30 yards, clearly visible in the sandy soil. Then they just stopped, not gradually fading, not being blown away by wind. They just ended, like whoever had been walking had simply ceased to exist. I felt cold despite the growing heat of the day. This was wrong. All of it was wrong. The unlisted highway, the abandoned truck, the footprints that went nowhere. I should have left right then. I should have gotten back in my truck, turned around, and driven back to Highway 395 as fast as I could. But I was committed now, too deep into the mystery to just walk away. I pulled out my phone, thinking maybe I'd gotten into cell range. Still no signal. I checked the time. It was 10:47 a.m. I'd been on Highway 78 for about half an hour. I took several photos of the abandoned truck with my phone, including close-ups of the company name and the license plate. Then I walked back to my own truck and climbed in. I sat there for a moment, debating my next move. I could turn around now, head back to Highway 395, report what I'd found to the authorities when I got somewhere with cell service. That would be the smart thing to do, but I'd come this far, and I was curious about those trees I'd seen from the turnoff, curious about what lay ahead on this impossible highway. I started the engine and pulled back onto the road, continuing east. The abandoned truck receded in my rearview mirror, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making a terrible mistake. But I kept driving, watching the mile markers count up. Mile 5, mile 7, mile 10. The landscape was unchanging, just endless desert in every direction. But ahead, those trees were getting closer. I could see them more clearly now, a dark line against the pale sky. And beyond the trees, something else. Structures of some kind, too far away to make out clearly, but definitely man-made. A town, maybe, or what was left of one. I checked my odometer. I'd driven 12 miles on Highway 78. Time to turn around, I told myself. Time to admit this had been a bad idea and get back to my actual route. But I didn't turn around. I kept driving, drawn toward those trees, toward whatever lay beyond them, like a moth toward a flame. The road began to descend slightly, dropping down into a shallow valley. The trees grew larger as I approached, and I could see now that they were cottonwoods, tall and gnarled, their leaves rustling in the breeze. Trees like that meant water, and sure enough, as I got closer, I could see the glint of sunlight on a small stream running alongside the road. And then I saw the town. It was small, maybe a dozen buildings clustered around a crossroads. Most of the structures looked abandoned, their windows dark, their paint faded and peeling. But there was something about the way they were arranged, something about their architectural style that seemed odd, outdated, like I was looking at a place that had been frozen in time. A weathered sign at the edge of town read, "Welcome to Denio, population 47. Below that, in smaller letters, "Gateway to the High Desert." I'd heard of Denio before. It was a real place, a tiny settlement on the Oregon-Nevada border. But according to my maps, Denio was nowhere near here. It was at least 50 miles to the south and east, accessible via a different route entirely. So either I'd gotten completely turned around and disoriented, driving in circles without realizing it, or this was a different Denio, or maybe no Denio at all, just a town that happened to have the same name. I slowed to a crawl as I entered the town, my eyes scanning the buildings for any sign of life. The main street, if you could call it that, was paved but in terrible condition. Potholes and cracks covered the surface and weeds grew up through the gaps. Most of the buildings were clearly abandoned. A gas station with ancient pumps, a small grocery store with boarded-up windows, a post office with a flag hanging limp in the still air. Everything had that look of long neglect, of being left behind by time. But then I saw something that made me stop the truck completely. There was a diner on the corner, a small building with a faded sign reading Desert Rose Cafe. And in the window, I could see lights, dim and flickering, but definitely on. Someone was here. I pulled into the dirt parking lot in front of the diner and turned off the engine. I sat there for a long moment, staring at the building, trying to decide if this was real or if I'd somehow fallen asleep at the wheel and was dreaming all of this. But everything felt real. The heat, the steering wheel under my hands, the rumble of the engine as it cooled. This wasn't a dream. I climbed down from the cab and approached the diner. The windows were grimy, making it hard to see inside, but I could definitely see lights and what looked like someone moving around. I pushed open the door. A bell chimed, the sound seeming too loud in the silence. The interior was dim, lit by a few bare bulbs hanging from the ceiling. There were a half-dozen tables, most of them covered with a thin layer of dust. Behind a counter at the back, I could see a kitchen area. And standing behind the counter was a woman. She was maybe 60 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a bun. She wore a faded waitress uniform, and she was wiping down the counter with a rag. When I entered, she looked up and smiled, like she'd been expecting me. "Welcome, honey," she said. Her voice was warm, friendly, utterly normal. "You must be hungry after that long drive." I just stood there trying to process what I was seeing. After all the strangeness of the morning, after the impossible highway and the abandoned truck and the town that shouldn't be here, I'd walked into what appeared to be a normal, functioning diner. Yeah, I managed. "I could eat." She gestured to one of the tables. "Have a seat. I'll bring you some coffee." I sat down, still half convinced I was hallucinating. The table was dusty, like everything else in here, but the chair was solid beneath me. Through the window, I could see my truck parked outside, proof that I hadn't completely lost my mind. The woman brought over a mug of coffee. It was hot, fresh. The smell of it was comforting, grounding. I wrapped my hands around the mug, feeling the warmth seep into my fingers. "Where am I?" I asked. She smiled again, but this time there was something sad in it. "Denio, or what's left of it anyway. But Denio is 50 miles south and east," she finished. "I know. Everyone who comes through says the same thing." I stared at her. "What do you mean, everyone who comes through? How many people come through here?" She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. "Not many these days. Used to be more, back when the highway was still on the maps, but it's been years since the maps showed it. Now, it's just the occasional trucker who takes a wrong turn. Like you." "I didn't take a wrong turn," I said. "I deliberately turned onto Highway 78. "Then you're the first in a long time to do that on purpose," she said. "Most people just end up here. They're driving along, not paying attention, and suddenly they're on 78 instead of where they meant to be." "That's impossible," I said, but the word felt hollow. After everything I'd seen this morning, impossible didn't mean much anymore. She shrugged. "Call it what you want. I just know what I've seen. People come through, they're confused, they ask questions I can't answer. Then they leave, and I never see them again." "What about that other truck?" I asked. "The abandoned one about 10 miles back. Do you know anything about that?" Her expression darkened. "That driver came through about 3 weeks ago. Young guy, maybe 30. He stopped here, ate a meal, asked the same questions you're asking. I told him to turn around, to go back the way he came, but he didn't listen. He wanted to see where the highway went, wanted to follow it all the way to the end. And and he never came back. His truck turned up empty a few days later, right where you saw it. I felt my stomach tighten. What happened to him? I don't know, she said quietly. No one knows. That's the thing about Highway 78, people disappear here. Not all of them, but enough that you learn to be careful. Enough that you learn not to ask too many questions. I sat back in my chair, trying to process this. Why do you stay here? If this place is dangerous, if people disappear, why haven't you left? She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, Because I can't. None of us can. We're part of this place now, just like it's part of us. None of you? There are others. A few, scattered around town. We keep to ourselves mostly, but we're here. Have been for a long time. How long? She stood up, not answering the question. You should eat something. You'll need your strength for the drive back. Back to Highway 395? I asked. Yes. Turn around. Head west. Don't stop for anything. And whatever you do, don't try to drive east past this town. That's where he went, the driver of that truck you found. That's where they all go when they don't listen. She disappeared into the kitchen, leaving me alone with my coffee and my thoughts. I looked around the diner, really looked at it this time. The dust on the tables, the cracks in the ceiling, the ancient jukebox in the corner that probably hadn't worked in decades. This place felt wrong. Not dangerous exactly, but wrong. Like it was caught between states, between existing and not existing. The woman came back with a plate of eggs and toast. The food looked real enough, smelled real. I picked up a fork and took a bite. It tasted normal. Good even, but as I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was making another mistake. That by stopping here, by eating this food, by talking to this woman, I was binding myself to this place in some way I didn't understand. I finished the meal quickly and stood up. How much do I owe you? She waved a hand. Nothing. We don't use money here anymore, haven't for years. Then what do you use? She just smiled that sad smile again. You should go now, while you still can. I pulled out my wallet anyway and left a $20 bill on the table. Then I headed for the door, eager to get back to my truck, back to the highway, back to the real world. As I reached the door, she called out to me. Hey, driver, what's your name? Wyatt, I said. Wyatt Dalton. She nodded slowly. I'll remember that, in case anyone comes asking. I didn't like the sound of that, but I didn't stop to ask what she meant. I pushed through the door and hurried back to my truck. The sun was directly overhead now, turning the desert into a blast furnace. I climbed into the cab and started the engine, eager to feel the AC kick in. As the truck rumbled to life, I took one last look at the diner. The woman was standing in the window, watching me. She raised one hand in a small wave. I put the truck in gear and pulled out of the parking lot, heading back west on Highway 78. Back toward Highway 395. Back toward sanity. But as I drove through Denio, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The population sign at the edge of town had changed. It now read, Population 48. I drove west on Highway 78 for exactly 47 minutes before I realized I wasn't going to make it back to Highway 395. The first sign of trouble came when I checked my odometer. I'd been driving for almost an hour, and I'd covered about 50 miles according to the gauge. That should have put me well past the Highway 395 junction, back in familiar territory. But there was no junction. The road just kept extending west through the desert, straight and empty, with no sign of the turnoff I'd used to get here. I kept my speed steady at 60, not wanting to rush, but not wanting to waste fuel either. The landscape on both sides of the road looked identical to what I'd seen on the drive in. Same sagebrush, same scattered rocks, same mountains in the distance. But something about it felt copied, like I was looking at a photograph of the desert rather than the desert itself. The shadows weren't falling quite right. The sun was in the wrong position for this time of day, and there was no wind, I realized. The sagebrush wasn't moving at all, just standing perfectly still like it had been frozen in place. I rolled down my window to feel the air, and that's when I noticed something else strange. The temperature outside was exactly the same as the temperature inside the cab. No change at all, like the desert and the truck existed in the same sealed environment. I slowed down, scanning the landscape for anything familiar. That abandoned truck should have been here somewhere, the same one I'd passed on my way to Denio. But the shoulder was empty. No truck, no sign that one had ever been there. I pulled over and checked my paper atlas again, even though I knew it wouldn't help. According to the map, I shouldn't even be on Highway 78. This road wasn't supposed to exist, and yet here I was, driving on it, feeling the vibration of the pavement under my tires. I grabbed a pen from the cup holder and marked my position on the map, drawing a line representing Highway 78 even though no such line existed in the printed version. I noted the time, 2:47 p.m. I'd left Denio at 1 o'clock p.m., give or take. An hour and 47 minutes of driving west, and I should have been well past the junction by now. I looked at the fuel gauge, still 3/4 full. That was impossible. I should have burned through at least an eighth of a tank in that time. But the needle hadn't moved at all. I sat there with the engine idling, trying to figure out what to do. My phone still had no signal. My GPS was still dead. I had maybe 3/4 of a tank of fuel, enough for several more hours of driving, but driving to where? I checked the side mirrors, looking back down the road I'd just traveled. The pavement stretched out behind me, perfectly straight, disappearing into a heat shimmer on the horizon even though the day wasn't particularly hot. There should have been tire marks, some indication of where I'd been, but the road looked untouched, pristine, like no vehicle had ever driven on it. I thought about the woman at the diner, about her warning. Highway 78 doesn't work the way normal roads do. At the time, I'd thought she was being metaphorical. Now I was beginning to understand she'd been completely literal. I decided to keep going west. Eventually, I'd have to hit something. Another highway, a town, some landmark that would tell me where I was. I couldn't just drive in circles forever. I pulled back onto the road and continued west. The sun was past its zenith now, starting its slow descent toward the western horizon. I'd been on Highway 78 for about 4 hours total, and I was starting to feel the effects of the stress. My shoulders were tense, my jaw clenched. I forced myself to relax, to breathe deeply, to stay calm. Panicking wouldn't help. I was a professional driver with 19 years of experience. I knew how to handle unexpected situations. This was just another problem to solve, another challenge to overcome. But deep down, I knew this was different. This wasn't a mechanical failure or bad weather or a missed exit. This was something fundamentally wrong with reality itself. I tried the radio again, hoping to pick up something, anything, that would ground me in the real world. The tuner scanned through the frequencies, finding nothing but static at first. Then it caught something on the AM band, faint and distant. It was music, old country music, the kind my grandfather used to listen to, Hank Williams or someone like that. The signal was weak, fading in and out, but I could make out some of the lyrics. Something about lost highways and endless roads. Then the music cut out, replaced by a voice. It sounded like a radio announcer speaking in that formal, measured tone they used back in the 1950s. Highway 78, the road to nowhere and everywhere. If you find yourself here, traveler, know that you have crossed a threshold. The rules you knew no longer apply. Time moves differently here. Space folds in on itself. And the only way forward... Static swallowed the rest of the sentence. I adjusted the tuner, trying to recapture the signal, but it was gone. Just empty hiss across all frequencies. I turned the radio off, my hands shaking slightly on the wheel. That broadcast couldn't have been real. It had to be my mind playing tricks, my subconscious creating explanations for what I was experiencing. But it had felt real. It had sounded real. I drove for another hour. The landscape never changed. Just the same endless desert stretching out in all directions. No towns, no intersections, no other vehicles. Just the road and the sky and the emptiness. My throat was getting dry. I'd finished the coffee I'd bought in Lakeview hours ago, and I hadn't thought to bring more water. The woman at the diner had given me food, but I'd been too unsettled to think about supplies for a longer journey. I checked the fuel gauge again. Still 3/4 full. The needle hadn't moved at all, despite over 2 hours of driving since the last check. Either the gauge was broken, or something even stranger was happening. Then I saw something ahead that made my stomach drop. Trees. A dark line of cottonwoods growing alongside the road. I slowed down, my heart pounding. No, it couldn't be. I'd been driving west for over an hour and a half. There was no way I could be back at Denio already. But as I got closer, there was no denying it. The trees were the same, the stream running alongside the road was the same, and beyond the trees I could see the buildings of the town. I'd driven in a complete circle somehow, ending up right back where I'd started. I pulled into Denio and stopped in the middle of the main street, just sitting there, trying to process what had happened. The town looked exactly as it had before. The same abandoned buildings, the same faded signs. The diner, with its dim lights still visible through the grimy windows, and the population sign at the edge of town still read, Population 48. I climbed down from the cab and walked over to the diner. The bell chimed as I pushed through the door, and the woman looked up from behind the counter. If she was surprised to see me again, she didn't show it. "Back so soon?" she asked, and there was something knowing in her voice, like she'd seen this exact scenario play out countless times. "I drove west," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I drove west for over an hour and a half. I should be back at Highway 395 by now. Instead, I'm here. How is that possible?" I walked closer to the counter, and for the first time I noticed the details of the place. There was a calendar on the wall behind her, yellowed with age, showing October 1987. The coffee pot on the warmer looked like it had been sitting there for decades, the liquid inside thick and dark. A fly strip hung from the ceiling, covered in the desiccated bodies of insects that had died long ago. She set down the rag she'd been using to wipe the counter and looked at me with those sad eyes. "I tried to warn you. Highway 78 doesn't work the way normal roads do. It doesn't matter which direction you drive, you always end up back here." "That's impossible," I said, but the word felt even more hollow than before. "Is it?" she asked. "You drove a road that's not on any map. You found a town that's in the wrong place. A man disappeared 3 weeks ago and nobody even knows he's missing. At what point do you stop saying impossible and start accepting what's happening?" I slumped into a chair, feeling the weight of the situation crushing down on me. The vinyl seat cracked under my weight, the foam padding beneath it compressed to almost nothing. I noticed the pattern on the Formica table, a design that hadn't been popular since before I was born. Everything in this place was frozen in time, preserved like an insect in amber. "There has to be a way out. There has to be." "There is," she said. "But it's not the way you think." I looked up at her. "What do you mean?" She came around the counter and sat down across from me, her movements slow and deliberate. Up close, I could see more details. The waitress uniform she wore was authentic vintage, not a reproduction. Her hands were weathered, the skin thin and papery, but she moved with the certainty of someone much younger. "How long have you really been here?" I asked suddenly. "You said you don't remember, but you must have some idea." She folded her hands on the table, and I noticed she wore a wedding ring. Simple gold, worn smooth with age. The last date I remember clearly was October 12, 1987. That was the day Highway 78 was officially closed, when they took it off the maps. 1987. I did the math in my head. That's over 30 years ago. "Is it?" she asked, with that sad smile. Time doesn't mean much here. To me, it feels like it was just last week. Or maybe last year. The days all blend together after a while. She came around the counter and sat down across from me, just like before. Highway 78 is a loop. East or west, it doesn't matter. You'll always end up back here in Denio. But there's a third option. "What option?" "You can drive through," she said. "Past Denio, heading east. Keep going until you reach the end of the highway." "That's what the other driver did," I said. "The one whose truck I found, and he disappeared." "Yes," she admitted. "He did. But that doesn't mean you will. Every person who comes here is different. Some of them make it through, some of them don't." "What's at the end of the highway?" I asked. "What's out there?" She was quiet for a long moment. Finally, she said, "I don't know. I've never been past the town limits. None of us have. We're bound here, stuck in this place. But you're different. You still have a choice." "Some choice," I muttered. "Drive in circles forever or risk disappearing like that other driver." "There's a third option," she said again. "You could stay." I looked at her sharply. "Stay here? Become one of you?" "It's not the worst fate," she said. "It's quiet here, safe in its way. No bills to pay, no schedules to keep, no worries about the future because there is no future. Just an endless present, day after day, unchanging." "That sounds like hell," I said. She smiled sadly. "Maybe. Or maybe it's just different. Maybe it's what you make of it." I stood up, shaking my head. "I'm not staying here. There has to be a way out, a real way out. I just need to figure out what it is." "Then you'd better figure it out soon," she said. "Because the longer you stay on Highway 78, the harder it gets to leave. Ask anyone in this town. They all thought they'd find a way out eventually. Now, they can't even remember what it was like to be anywhere else." I left the diner and walked back to my truck, my mind racing. I needed to think this through logically. There was a pattern here, rules that governed how this place worked. I just needed to understand them. I climbed into the cab and pulled out my logbook. I needed to document everything, to create a record that made sense. But when I opened the book and looked at my most recent entries, I felt a chill run down my spine. According to my logbook, I'd left Klamath Falls yesterday morning. But that couldn't be right. I'd left this morning, just a few hours ago. I clearly remembered stopping for coffee, eating that breakfast burrito, starting the drive east. But the logbook didn't lie. The date on the last entry was March 14th. Today was March 15th. Somehow, I'd lost an entire day. I flipped back through earlier entries, looking for any other discrepancies. Everything seemed normal up until yesterday. My routes were accurate, my times made sense, my locations matched my memories. But then I noticed something strange. 3 days ago, on March 12th, I'd apparently driven through Lakeview, Oregon. According to my notes, I'd stopped for fuel there around 9 a.m. But I remembered that stop. It had happened this morning, not 3 days ago. Except according to my logbook, this morning was 3 days in the past. I set the logbook aside, feeling my grip on reality starting to slip. Time wasn't working right here. Or maybe it was my memory that wasn't working right. I couldn't tell anymore. I stared at the pages, trying to find some explanation that made sense. Maybe I'd filled out the dates wrong. Maybe I'd been more tired than I realized, losing track of days without noticing. But the entries were in my handwriting, dated in my own hand, and they contradicted everything I remembered about the last few days. I grabbed my phone and checked the date there. March 15th, 2018. Same as the logbook. But that meant I'd been on the road for 3 days, not the few hours I remembered. Where had the time gone? What had I been doing for those missing days? I tried to think back, to piece together a timeline. I remembered leaving home on when? March 12th? That matched the logbook. I remembered the drive to Klamath Falls, stopping for the night. Then, there was a gap, a fuzzy period where my memories didn't quite connect. Had I stopped somewhere else? Had I driven Highway 78 before, looped through multiple times without realizing it? The more I tried to remember, the less certain I became about anything. I started the engine and pulled out of Denio, heading east this time. If driving west just brought me back here, and staying was out of the question, then I had no choice but to go forward, to see what lay at the end of Highway 78, whatever that might be. The woman from the diner was right about one thing. I still had a choice. And I was choosing to move forward, even if that meant risking whatever had happened to the driver of that abandoned truck. The road stretched out ahead of me, arrow straight across the desert floor. I checked my odometer, making a mental note of the mileage. I wanted to see how far I could go, how long this highway really was. Mile after mile passed. The landscape remained unchanged. Just the same brown desert, the same distant mountains, the same empty sky. I kept expecting to see something, some landmark or feature that would break the monotony, but there was nothing. After about an hour, I passed a mile marker, Highway 78, mile 35. I'd driven roughly 25 miles east of Denio. I kept going. The sun was getting lower now, the light taking on that golden quality of late afternoon. Shadows stretched across the desert, long and dark. In another couple of hours it would be sunset, and I didn't want to be driving this cursed highway in the dark. Mile 45, mile 55, mile 65. The road never curved, never climbed or descended, just straight east, as if drawn with a ruler across the surface of the earth. Then, at mile 73, something changed. The pavement began to deteriorate. Not gradually, but suddenly, dramatically. One moment I was driving on rough but serviceable asphalt, and the next moment the road surface was cracked and broken, with potholes large enough to swallow a tire. I had to slow down to barely 15 miles an hour, carefully picking my way through the maze of holes and cracks. The truck bounced and rattled, and I could hear things shifting in the trailer. The agricultural equipment I was hauling was taking a beating. The thought of my cargo snapped me back to reality for a moment. I was supposed to deliver this equipment to Boise. I had a schedule to keep, a deadline to meet. My dispatcher was probably wondering where I was by now, why I hadn't checked in. But I had no way to contact him, no way to explain that I was lost on a highway that didn't exist, trapped in a loop that defied all logic. The road continued to worsen. Soon, it wasn't really a road at all, just a vague path through the desert, marked more by the absence of vegetation than by any actual paving. The truck crawled along at walking pace, and I began to wonder if I'd have to turn around, if the road itself was forcing me back. Then I saw it. In the distance, maybe a mile ahead, the road came to an end, not at an intersection or a turnaround, but at a physical barrier. As I got closer, I could see that it was a fence. A tall, chain-link fence stretching across the highway, blocking any further progress. I pulled up to the fence and stopped, leaving the engine running. The fence was about 12 feet high, topped with barbed wire. It looked new, the metal still shiny and unweathered. Attached to the fence was a sign. Road closed. No entry. By order of... The rest of the sign was obscured by rust or damage, the words illegible, but the message was clear enough. This was the end of the highway. This was where Highway 78 stopped. I climbed down from the cab and walked up to the fence, peering through the chain link. Beyond the fence, I could see the desert continuing, but something about it looked different. The colors were wrong somehow, too vivid or too muted, I couldn't tell which. The air seemed to shimmer, not with heat, but with something else, something I couldn't identify. And in the far distance, barely visible through the shimmer, I could see something large and dark, a structure of some kind, or maybe a natural formation. It was too far away to make out clearly, but there was something about it that made my skin crawl. I walked along the fence line looking for a gate or an opening. After about 50 yards, I found one. A gate secured with a chain and padlock. The padlock looked old, but it was still solid. I wouldn't be able to break it without tools. I stood there staring at the gate, trying to decide what to do. The woman at the diner had said that some people made it through, but others disappeared. Was this where they disappeared? Beyond this fence, and whatever lay in that shimmer on the horizon. I pulled out my phone to check the time, and I was shocked to see that I had signal. Just one bar, but it was there. Quickly, before it disappeared again, I tried to call my dispatcher. The call connected. It rang twice, then 3 times. Then someone picked up. "Hello?" It was my dispatcher's voice, but there was something wrong with it. It sounded distant, distorted, like he was speaking through water. "Hey, it's Wyatt," I said. "I know I'm late, but something's happened. I got turned around on..." "Wyatt?" The voice on the other end sounded confused. "Wyatt Dalton?" "Yeah, who else would it be?" There was a long pause, then, "Wyatt, where are you calling from?" "I'm in Eastern Oregon, somewhere near..." "Wyatt," the voice interrupted. "This is Jim Henderson. Your dispatcher was Mike Ross. Mike died 2 years ago." I felt the phone slip from my numb fingers. It hit the ground with a crack, the screen shattering, but I barely noticed. My mind was reeling, trying to process what I'd just heard. 2 years? That was impossible. I'd talked to Mike just a few days ago. He'd given me this job, this route, these instructions, unless he hadn't. Unless my memory was wrong. Unless time on Highway 78 didn't match time in the real world. I picked up the phone with shaking hands. The screen was cracked, but it was still working. The call had disconnected, but I could see the date displayed at the top of the screen. March 15th, 2020. 2 years after I'd supposedly left Klamath Falls. 2 years I couldn't account for. 2 years that had somehow passed while I was driving this impossible highway. I staggered back to my truck and climbed into the cab, my mind in chaos. This wasn't just a spatial anomaly anymore. It was temporal, too. Time moved differently on Highway 78, or maybe it didn't move at all. Maybe I'd been driving in circles for 2 years, looping back to Denio over and over, thinking it was the same day. I looked at my logbook again, flipping through the pages with trembling hands. The entries all looked recent to me, but the dates jumped around wildly. March 12th, 2018. March 14th, 2019. March 15th, 2020. Back to March 13th, 2018. I'd been trapped on this highway for 2 years, experiencing the same few days over and over again. never aging, never moving forward. Just stuck in an endless loop. The woman at the diner had said people couldn't leave once they'd been here long enough. Now I understood why. It wasn't that they couldn't physically leave. It was that they'd lost so much time, they had nothing to go back to. Their jobs would be gone, their families would have moved on, their entire lives would have continued without them. I sat there in the cab of my truck, parked at the end of Highway 78, and I realized I had a choice to make. I could try to go back, drive west to Denio, then somehow find a way to break the loop and return to Highway 395, to the real world. But what would I be returning to? What was left of my life after 2 years? Or I could stay here, accept what had happened, and make a new life in Denio, with the other people who'd gotten trapped here. The woman at the diner had said it wasn't the worst fate. Maybe she was right. Or I could go forward, climb that fence, walk through that shimmer on the horizon, see what lay beyond. Maybe that's where the missing drivers had gone. Maybe that's where the highway really led. I looked at the fence, at the padlock on the gate. I could break it if I really wanted to. I had tools in the truck, a tire iron that would make short work of that old lock. The question was, did I want to? Did I want to see what was beyond that fence, beyond that shimmer? Or was ignorance, in this case, the better choice? I sat there as the sun sank lower in the sky, turning the desert orange and red and purple. The shimmer beyond the fence seemed to intensify in the fading light, pulsing with colors I didn't have names for. And somewhere in the back of my mind, I heard a voice. Not the radio, not any external sound, just a voice in my thoughts, speaking words I couldn't quite understand. Come forward, complete the journey, see what lies beyond. I put my hand on the door handle, ready to climb down, ready to break that lock and walk through that gate. But something stopped me, some last vestige of self-preservation, some instinct that told me that once I went through that fence, there would be no coming back. Not to Denio, not to Highway 395, not to anywhere in the world I knew. I took my hand off the door handle and put the truck in reverse. Slowly, carefully, I backed away from the fence, turned around, and started driving west. Back toward Denio, back toward the loop, back toward the only thing I had left. As I drove, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. The fence was gone. The end of the highway had simply vanished, replaced by more road stretching endlessly east. It was like it had never been there at all, like I'd never been there at all. I made it back to Denio just as the sun was setting. The town looked different in the dim light, the shadows deeper, the buildings more skeletal. I pulled into the parking lot of the diner and turned off the engine. The woman was still there, visible through the window, still wiping down that same counter. I wondered if she'd been doing that all day, or if time worked differently for her too, if maybe only seconds had passed from her perspective while I'd been gone for hours. I sat in my truck for a long time, watching the last of the daylight fade from the sky. Stars began to appear, more stars than I'd ever seen before. Out here, far from any cities, the night sky was a river of light. I should have been exhausted. I'd been driving all day, dealing with stress and fear and the mind-bending impossibility of this place. But I felt alert, wired, like I'd been pumped full of adrenaline. Finally, I climbed down from the cab and went into the diner. The bell chimed, and the woman looked up. "You went to the fence," she said. It wasn't a question. "How did you know?" "Everyone goes to the fence eventually. Everyone who drives east." She set down her rag and came around the counter. "Did you go through?" "No," I said. "I came back." She nodded, like she'd expected that answer. "Smart. Most people who go through don't come back." "Most? So some do come back?" A few, she said. Not many, and the ones who do come back. She trailed off, her expression troubled. What about them? They're different, changed. Like they've seen something they shouldn't have seen, learned something they shouldn't know. They don't stay long. Usually just pass through town and keep driving west. I don't know where they end up. I sat down at one of the tables, suddenly feeling the weight of exhaustion hit me. I don't understand any of this. The loop, the fence, the time jumps. What is this place? You want the truth? She asked. Or do you want a comforting lie? The truth. She sat down across from me, folding her hands on the table. In the dim light, she looked older than I'd first thought, her face lined with years of weariness. Highway 78 is a mistake, she said, an error in the world. There are places like this scattered around, thin spots where reality doesn't quite hold together right. Most of them are small, barely noticeable. A room that's always cold, a stretch of woods where compasses don't work right, a lake where the fish are all deformed. Little glitches that most people never notice. But Highway 78 is different. Highway 78 is different, she agreed. Because someone tried to fix it. Fix what? The thin spot. Back in the 1950s, the state was building highways through this part of Oregon. They mapped out a route that would connect Lakeview to Denio, make it easier for ranchers to transport their livestock. But when they started construction, they hit the thin spot. Machinery would malfunction. Workers would get disoriented. Time would jump around. They should have stopped, should have routed the highway somewhere else. But they didn't. No, they pushed through, built the highway right over the thin spot, thinking concrete and asphalt would somehow seal it up, make it stable. And for a while, it seemed to work. Highway 78 was completed, open to traffic. People used it for years without incident. What changed? The thin spot started bleeding through again. Little things at first. Drivers would report their odometers jumping, their radios picking up strange signals. Then bigger things. People getting lost, taking longer to complete the drive than they should. And then people started disappearing. She paused, looking out the window at the darkness beyond. The state closed the highway in 1987, took it off the maps, rerouted traffic. Most of the towns along Highway 78 were abandoned, the residents relocated. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't, I said. No. Because the highway still existed, still connected those abandoned places, still ran across that thin spot. And thin spots don't like to be covered up. They push back, they spread, they try to reclaim what was built over them. Highway 78 started appearing on its own, connecting to other roads, drawing people in, like it was hungry for travelers. And the people who come here, I asked, the ones like me? Most find their way out eventually. They drive in circles for a few hours or a few days. Then suddenly they're back on Highway 395, back in the real world. Their GPS glitches. Their memories are confused, but they're fine. They tell themselves it was just exhaustion, just stress playing tricks on their mind. But some don't make it out. No, she said quietly. Some don't. Some of us get stuck here, caught in the loop. And after a while, we stop trying to leave. We accept where we are. We become part of the place. How long have you been here? I asked. She smiled sadly. I don't remember anymore. Long enough that the outside world feels like a dream. Long enough that I've forgotten what it means to move forward in time instead of circling through the same days over and over. I thought about my logbook, the jumbled dates, the 2 years I'd apparently lost. How do I get out? There has to be a way. There is, she said, but it's not easy. You have to break the pattern, do something unexpected, something the highway doesn't anticipate. Like what? I don't know. It's different for everyone. Some people find their way out by refusing to drive, by sitting still until the loop breaks. Others escape by doing the opposite, driving as fast as they can without stopping. One man told me he got out by driving backwards the entire length of the highway. Did that work? He's not here anymore, so I assume it did. But like I said, it's different for everyone. You'll have to figure out your own way. I stood up, feeling a renewed sense of determination. Then I'll start now. I'll try every possible option until I find the one that works. Wait, she said. There's something else you should know. I paused at the door. What? You're not alone here. Not anymore. I turned back to her. What do you mean? There are other travelers on Highway 78 right now. I've seen their headlights, heard their engines. 3 of them, maybe 4. They're all looking for a way out, just like you. So be careful. Some people who get trapped here, they don't stay human for long. The highway changes them, makes them part of itself. They're not dangerous exactly, but they're not entirely trustworthy either. They might try to help you, or they might try to keep you here. You won't know which until it's too late. I felt a chill run down my spine. How do I tell the difference between real people and the other kind? You can't, she said. That's the problem. They look like us, talk like us, remember being us. But something essential has changed. They're hollow inside, echoes of who they used to be. I left the diner and walked back to my truck, my mind spinning. Other travelers on Highway 78. Some of them might be allies, people I could work with to find a way out. Or they might be something else, something that only looked human. I climbed into the cab and sat there trying to decide what to do next. The smart thing would be to get some sleep, to rest and recover before attempting to break the loop. But I was afraid that if I fell asleep here, I might not wake up. Or worse, I might wake up having lost more time, days or weeks or years passing while I slept. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking lot, heading west out of Denio. I'd drive until I found something, some clue or sign that would tell me how to escape. The night was dark, the stars brilliant overhead. My headlights carved a cone of light through the blackness, illuminating the road ahead. I drove slowly, carefully, watching for any changes in the landscape. After about 20 minutes, I saw them, headlights in the distance, coming toward me from the west. Another vehicle, another traveler. I slowed down as we approached each other, and I got a good look at the other vehicle as it passed. It was a pickup truck, newer model, with a single occupant. The driver was a man, middle-aged, with a beard and a baseball cap. He glanced at me as we passed, and for just a moment our eyes met. His expression was blank, not scared or confused or relieved to see another person, just blank, like he was looking through me rather than at me. I watched in my rearview mirror as his taillights receded into the darkness. Then they were gone, and I was alone again. Or was I? The woman at the diner had said there were 3 or 4 other travelers. If that was one, where were the rest? I continued west, keeping my eyes open for any other vehicles. The road stretched on, endless and unchanging. I checked my odometer periodically, marking how far I'd traveled. 10 miles, 20, 30. I should have reached Highway 395 by now. I should have been off Highway 78 back in the real world. But the road just kept going, and ahead of me I could see Denio again. I'd made another loop without even realizing it. The town appeared out of the darkness, its few lights like beacons in the night. I pulled over before reaching the town and just sat there, trying to control the rising panic. This wasn't working. Driving west wasn't the answer. Neither was driving east. The loop was too strong. the pattern too ingrained. I needed to think outside the box, do something the highway wouldn't expect. That's when I had an idea. The woman had said some people escaped by refusing to drive, by sitting still. But what if I did the opposite? What if I drove off the road entirely into the desert? It was a risky move. I could get stuck in the sand, damage the truck, strand myself in the middle of nowhere. But staying on Highway 78 was clearly not working. I put the truck in gear and cranked the wheel hard to the right, leaving the pavement and driving into the desert. The truck bounced and rattled over the rough terrain, sagebrush scraping against the undercarriage. I kept the speed low, not wanting to hit a rock or drop into a wash. The headlights illuminated the desert ahead, casting long shadows from the scattered vegetation. In the distance, I could see mountains, their dark silhouettes against the starry sky. I drove for about 10 minutes, the highway receding behind me, Denio's lights disappearing. I was truly off-road now, in the middle of nowhere, guided only by the stars and my own sense of direction. Then, without warning, the ground beneath me turned to pavement. I slammed on the brakes, staring in disbelief. I was back on Highway 78. Somehow, despite driving perpendicular to the road, I'd ended up back on it. The highway had followed me. Or maybe I'd never left it at all. Maybe the entire desert was part of the loop, and no matter where I drove, I'd always end up back on the same stretch of road. I sat there, engine idling, trying to comprehend what had just happened. The rules of this place made no sense. Space didn't work right. Time didn't work right. Causality itself seemed to be broken. That's when I saw the second traveler. It was another semi parked on the shoulder about 100 yards ahead. The running lights were on, but the cab appeared to be empty. As I approached, my headlights illuminated the side of the trailer, and I could see the company name painted there. Hardin Transport, Reno, NV. My blood ran cold. This was the same truck I'd seen earlier, the abandoned one I'd investigated. But that truck had been 10 miles east of Denio. Now it was here, west of town, like it had moved on its own. Or maybe there were multiple trucks. Maybe this was a different one from the same company. I pulled up alongside it and got out, grabbing my flashlight. I walked over to the abandoned truck and climbed up to look in the cab. Empty, just like before. Keys in the ignition, coffee cup in the holder, paperback book on the seat. Everything exactly the same. I climbed down and walked around to the trailer. The doors were closed, and when I opened them and shined my light inside, I saw what I expected. Empty, completely empty. But this time there was something else. Something I'd missed before, or maybe something that had been added since I'd last looked. There was writing on the floor of the trailer, scratched into the metal with something sharp. The letters were crude, but legible. Don't trust the others. They're not real. They want you to stay. I backed away from the trailer, my heart pounding. The driver of this truck, whoever they were, had left a warning. But warning against what? The woman at the diner had said there were other travelers, some of whom had been changed by the highway. Was this message about them? I heard an engine behind me and spun around. Another vehicle was approaching from the west, headlights cutting through the darkness. As it got closer, I could see it was the same pickup truck that had passed me earlier. The one with the blank-eyed driver. The truck slowed down and pulled over, stopping about 20 feet away. The driver's door opened and the man stepped out. He looked the same as before, middle-aged, bearded, wearing a baseball cap. But in the light of the headlights, I could see his expression more clearly. It was friendly, welcoming, too welcoming. "Hey there," he called out. "Looks like we're both lost on this crazy road. You got any idea how to get out of here?" I kept my distance, my hand resting on the door handle of my truck. I'm working on it. Yeah, me too, he said, walking closer. I've been driving for, hell, I don't even know how long anymore. Days, maybe weeks. Time's all screwed up here. But I think I'm starting to figure it out. Figure what out? The pattern, he said. The highway has a pattern, a rhythm. If you can sync up with it, match its frequency, you can slip through. Get back to the real world. How do you do that? I asked, not sure if I believed him, but curious to hear what he'd say. You have to stop fighting it, he said. Stop trying to escape. That's what keeps you trapped. The more you struggle, the tighter the loop gets. But if you relax, if you accept where you are, the highway lets you go. I thought about the woman at the diner, about how she'd said people who stayed too long stopped trying to leave. Was that what had happened to this man? Had he accepted his fate, and now he was trying to convince others to do the same? I don't think that's right, I said carefully. I think the highway wants us to accept it. That's the trap. His friendly expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. You're making a mistake. Fighting it will only make things worse. Maybe, I said, but I'd rather make that mistake than give up. He stared at me for a long moment. Then he shrugged and turned back to his truck. Suit yourself, but when you've been here as long as I have, you'll understand. He climbed back into his pickup and drove away, heading west toward Denio. I watched his taillights disappear, then turned back to the abandoned Hardin transport truck. The writing on the trailer floor had been right. Don't trust the others. That man, whoever he was, had been changed by Highway 78. He was part of the loop now, trying to bring others into it. I needed to find the real travelers, the ones who were still fighting to escape. But how could I tell the difference? How could I know who was real and who was an echo? I climbed back into my truck and started driving east, back toward Denio. As I passed through the town, I saw movement in the diner. The woman was still there, still wiping that counter. I didn't stop. On the other side of town, I saw another vehicle parked on the shoulder. It was a sedan, older model, with out-of-state plates. Someone was sitting in the driver's seat, and as I passed, they waved at me. I kept driving, not sure if I should stop or not. But then I noticed something. The person in the sedan had waved with their left hand. Their right arm wasn't visible, like it might be injured or missing. I hit the brakes and backed up until I was alongside the sedan. I rolled down my window, and the other driver did the same. It was a woman, maybe 40 years old, with short, dark hair and glasses. She looked tired but alert, her eyes sharp and focused. "Thank God," she said. "I thought I was the only real person left here." "Real person?" I asked. "Yeah," she said. "As opposed to I don't know what to call them. The echoes? The copies? There are things here that look like people but aren't. I've learned to spot them after a while. How? Little things. They don't blink enough. They always smile, even when there's nothing to smile about. And they all say the same things, try to convince you to stop fighting, to accept where you are." I thought about the man in the pickup truck. I think I met one of them. Then you're lucky you didn't listen. I've seen what happens to people who accept this place. They fade, bit by bit, until there's nothing left of who they used to be. "How long have you been here?" I asked. 3 days, she said. At least I think it's been 3 days. It's hard to tell, but I've been keeping track, marking time, trying to stay grounded in reality. 3 days. In Highway 78 terms, that could mean anything. But she seemed lucid, focused, more human than anyone else I'd met here. "I'm Wyatt," I said. "Lauren," she replied. "Lauren Hayes. And before you ask, yes, I've tried everything I can think of to get out of here. Driving east, driving west, driving off-road, sitting still, going fast, going slow, nothing works. There has to be a way, I said. People have escaped before. If they have, they didn't leave instructions, she said bitterly. I'm starting to think the only way out is to be chosen, like the highway decides who gets to leave and who doesn't. I didn't want to believe that, but I was running out of other explanations. What if we worked together? Two people might be able to find something one person would miss. She considered this, then nodded. Okay, but we need to establish some ground rules. First, we don't split up. Second, we don't trust anyone else we meet unless we're both convinced they're real. And third, we don't stop in Denio. That place is the heart of the loop. The longer you spend there, the harder it is to leave. Agreed, I said. Should we both drive, or I'll follow you, she said. That way, if one of us gets caught in the loop, the other might still be free. I nodded and pulled back onto the road, Lauren's sedan following behind me. Together, we drove east through the night, two travelers looking for a way home. Lauren and I drove together for what felt like hours, though time had become meaningless on Highway 78. We tried everything we could think of, driving at different speeds, stopping and starting at random intervals, making erratic turns. Nothing worked. We always ended up back in Denio. After our fifth or sixth loop through the town, Lauren pulled up beside me and motioned for me to stop. We both got out and stood between our vehicles, the engine heat radiating into the cold night air. "This isn't working," she said, her voice tight with frustration. "We're missing something fundamental, some rule or pattern that we haven't figured out yet." I pulled out my logbook and showed her the jumbled dates, the inconsistencies in time. "I think the highway exists outside normal time, or maybe across multiple times simultaneously. That's why the dates don't match up, why people lose hours or days or years." She studied the logbook, her expression troubled. If that's true, then maybe the way out isn't through space at all. Maybe it's through time. "What do you mean?" "Think about it," she said. "Every time we drive the loop, we experience it as a continuous journey. But what if it's not? What if each loop is actually a different moment in time, and we're jumping between them?" I tried to wrap my head around that concept. "So, we're not moving through space at all. We're moving through time, or stuck in a temporal loop." "Exactly," she said. "And if that's true, then the way to break the loop might be to stop thinking of it as a physical journey. We need to find the moment when the loop begins and somehow prevent it from starting. How do we do that?" She was quiet for a moment, thinking. Then she said, "The turnoff, where Highway 78 connects to Highway 395, that's where you entered the loop, right?" "Yeah," I said. "I deliberately turned onto Highway 78. "And I got here differently," she said. "I was driving on a different highway entirely, Highway 140. I went around a curve, and when I came out of it, I was suddenly on Highway 78, like the road had changed underneath me. Two different entry points," I said, "but both leading to the same loop." "Which means there might be multiple entry points," she said. "Multiple places where normal roads connect to Highway 78. And maybe, if we can find the right exit point, we can slip out of the loop." It was the first theory that actually made sense to me. So, we need to explore the edges of the loop, find where it connects to the outside world. "Not just where it connects," Lauren said. "Where it's weakest, where the boundary is thin enough that we might be able to push through." We got back in our vehicles and started driving again, but this time with a different purpose. Instead of trying to reach a specific destination, we were looking for anomalies, places where the highway felt different or wrong. We drove slowly, paying attention to every detail: the texture of the pavement, the spacing of the mile markers, the way the landscape looked in the headlights. We were looking for glitches, for seams in the fabric of this impossible place. After about an hour, I noticed something. There was a stretch of road, maybe a quarter-mile long, where my truck's steering felt strange. Not loose exactly, but like I was driving through water instead of air. A subtle resistance that made the wheel harder to turn. I pulled over and motioned for Lauren to stop. When she got out of her car, I asked if she'd felt anything unusual. "Yeah," she said. "Like the road was pushing back somehow, like it didn't want us here." "That might be a boundary," I said. "A place where the loop is thin." We walked along the shoulder, examining the road more carefully. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Just the same cracked pavement, the same faded center line. But then Lauren pointed to something I'd missed. "Look at the mile marker." I turned and looked. There was a marker about 50 yards back, partially hidden by sagebrush. It read mile 78. "So," I said. "There was another mile 78 marker about 3 miles back," she said. "I noticed it because 78 is my birth year. We've passed 2 markers with the same number, which means we're in a section where the highway overlaps itself," I finished. "Where 2 different moments in the loop occupy the same space." "Exactly. And if 2 moments can overlap, maybe we can use that overlap to slip from one timeline to another." I looked at the stretch of road ahead, the section where the steering had felt strange. "So we just drive through it?" "Not drive," she said. "That's what we've been doing wrong. We've been trying to move through the loop, but movement is what keeps us trapped. We need to stand still while the loop moves around us." I understood what she was saying, even if it defied logic. We park our vehicles in this overlap section and wait for the loop to cycle past us. Right. When it does, we should be able to step out of it, like getting off a merry-go-round. It was a long shot, but it was the best idea we'd had. We drove our vehicles into the middle of the overlap section, the place where the steering felt strange, and parked them side by side. Then we both got out and stood between the trucks, waiting. At first, nothing happened. The night was quiet, the stars brilliant overhead. A coyote called in the distance, its howl echoing across the desert. Then I felt it, a subtle vibration, like standing on a highway bridge when a heavy truck passes underneath. The ground beneath my feet was shaking, but not with seismic motion. It was something else, something I didn't have words for. "Do you feel that?" Lauren asked, her voice tense. "Yeah." The vibration grew stronger. The air around us began to shimmer, like heat waves rising from hot pavement. But it was cold, and the shimmer wasn't heat. It was reality itself, wavering and uncertain. I could see double now. 2 versions of the same landscape, slightly offset from each other. 2 roads, 2 deserts, 2 skies. They were overlapping, trying to occupy the same space. Lauren grabbed my arm. "It's working. The loop is cycling. When it does, we need to step into the version of reality that's not Highway 78. How do we know which one that is?" "We don't. We just have to choose." The shimmer intensified. I could see 3 versions now, then 4, then so many overlapping realities that I couldn't count them all. Each one slightly different. Each one a moment in the loop playing out simultaneously. In one version, it was day. In another, it was raining. In another, the road was gone entirely. Just empty desert. "That one," Lauren said, pointing to the version where there was no road. "That's before Highway 78 was built. If we can reach that timeline, we'll be free." She was right. If we could get to a version of reality where Highway 78 had never existed, the loop couldn't hold us. But how do you step into the past? How do you move from one timeline to another? The answer, I realized, was that you don't move. You let go. You stop clinging to the version of reality you know and allow yourself to fall into another one. I closed my eyes and released my grip on the present moment. I let go of my certainty about where I was and when I was. I let go of my attachment to this version of Highway 78, this moment in the loop. For a brief instant, I felt like I was falling. The ground disappeared beneath my feet, and I was tumbling through layers of time, through all the different moments that Highway 78 had existed and not existed. Then, abruptly, I hit solid ground. I opened my eyes. I was standing in the desert. The road was gone. No pavement, no mile markers, no faded center line. Just sagebrush and sand and rocks stretching out in every direction. My truck was gone too. Lauren's sedan was gone. We were standing in the middle of nowhere, completely alone. Except we weren't alone. In the distance, maybe a mile away, I could see a highway. A real highway, with cars moving along it, their headlights visible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Is that Highway 395? Lauren asked, her voice filled with hope. "I think so," I said. We started walking toward it, picking our way carefully through the desert terrain. The walk took about 20 minutes, and with each step, I felt more grounded, more real. The disorientation of the loop was fading, replaced by normal sensations: tired feet, cold air, the smell of sagebrush. When we reached Highway 395, we stood on the shoulder and watched the cars pass. Normal traffic, normal people, going about their normal lives. They had no idea what we'd just been through, no concept of the impossible place we'd just escaped. I pulled out my phone. It had signal, full bars. I checked the date. March 16th, 2018. According to my phone, only 1 day had passed since I'd left Klamath Falls. But according to my logbook, 2 years had passed. I didn't know which one was true anymore. Lauren checked her phone too. March 16th, she confirmed. Same day I got lost. We looked at each other, both thinking the same thing. We'd escaped Highway 78, but we'd left our vehicles behind. My truck with its load of agricultural equipment. Her sedan with whatever belongings she'd had in it. "We need to report this," I said. "Tell someone what happened." "Tell them what?" Lauren asked. "That we got trapped on a highway that doesn't exist? That we lost 2 years but also only lost 1 day? They'll think we're crazy." She was right, of course. But we had to try. A car pulled over, a sedan with California plates. The driver rolled down his window. "You folks need help? You look lost." "We're fine," I said. We had some vehicle trouble. We need to get to the nearest town." "Lakeview's about 30 miles north," the driver said. "I'm headed that way. I can give you a ride." We accepted gratefully and climbed into his back seat. As we drove north on Highway 395, I kept looking out the window, searching for the turnoff to Highway 78. But I never saw it. There was no sign, no paved road branching off to the east. Nothing to indicate that the impossible highway existed at all. Maybe it had closed behind us. Maybe we'd broken the loop so thoroughly that Highway 78 had simply ceased to exist in this timeline. Or maybe it was still out there, waiting for the next travelers to find it. We reached Lakeview, and the driver dropped us off at a gas station. We thanked him and went inside to use the phone. I called my dispatcher, expecting to hear that strange, distorted voice again, expecting to be told that Mike Ross had been dead for 2 years. But when the call connected, it was Mike's voice, normal and clear. "Wyatt, where the hell are you? You were supposed to check in 3 hours ago." "I'm in Lakeview," I said. "I had some trouble with my truck." I need to report it stolen or abandoned. It's somewhere in eastern Oregon. I'm not exactly sure where. Are you okay? Do you need medical attention? No, I'm fine. I just need to file a report and arrange for a replacement vehicle. Mike was confused, but he took down the information and said he'd handle it. I hung up and looked at Lauren. She'd made her own calls, had her own explanations to give. What now? She asked. Now we try to go back to our normal lives, I said, and hope that Highway 78 stays gone. But I knew, even as I said it, that wasn't true. Highway 78 would never truly be gone. It would always be out there somewhere in some timeline, waiting. And part of me would always be there too, driving that endless loop, passing through Denio, seeing those mile markers repeat. Mile 78, mile 78, mile 78. 3 months later, I got a call from the Oregon State Police. They'd found my truck, they said, abandoned on the shoulder of a county road in eastern Oregon. The agricultural equipment was still in the trailer, undamaged. Everything was intact except for one thing. The logbook was missing. I drove out to retrieve the truck, and when I got there, I recognized the location immediately. I was on a county road just south of Lakeview, maybe 10 miles from where I'd entered Highway 78. The trooper who'd found the truck was there, waiting to release it to me. He was a middle-aged guy, professional and courteous, but when I asked him about the logbook, his expression changed. "That's the weird thing," he said. "There was a logbook in the cab when we first found the truck. I saw it myself, sitting on the passenger seat. But when we came back the next day to process the scene, it was gone, like someone had taken it." "Did you see what was written in it?" I asked. "Yeah," he said. "Just normal logbook entries. Dates, times, locations. Except," he hesitated. "Except what?" "Except the dates were all wrong. They jumped around, out of order. And some of the locations didn't make sense. You had entries claiming you'd been in places that don't exist." "Like where?" "Like a town called Denio," he said. "According to your logbook, you'd stopped there several times, but Denio is 50 miles from here over the Nevada border. There's no way you could have been there and ended up here." I didn't know what to say to that. I just signed the release papers, thanked the trooper, and climbed into my truck. The interior looked exactly as I'd left it 3 months ago. The coffee cup in the holder, the paperback book on the seat, the keys in the ignition. But there was something new. A note, tucked under the sun visor. I pulled it out and read it. "You escaped, congratulations. But know this, Highway 78 doesn't forget. It will call you back eventually. They all come back. LH, Lauren Hayes." I folded the note and put it in my pocket. Then I started the truck and drove away, heading back to my normal life, my normal roads. But I never forgot Highway 78. And sometimes, late at night when I'm driving through empty country, I'll see a turnoff that doesn't look quite right. A road that might not be on the maps. A sign that I can't quite read in the darkness. And I'll wonder if it's calling me back. If Highway 78 is waiting for me to make one more wrong turn, to take one more journey on the road that shouldn't exist. I haven't taken that turn, not yet. But some nights I'm tempted, because part of me is still there. Still driving that loop, still trying to understand what Highway 78 really was. And part of me always will be. My logbook sits in my truck, entries all in order now, dates matching up properly. But sometimes, when I'm not looking, a new entry appears, written in handwriting that looks like mine but isn't quite right. The entry is always the same, mile 78, still driving, still searching, will return when ready. I don't know if I wrote those entries in some other timeline, some version of reality where I never escaped. Or if Highway 78 itself is writing them, marking me as its own. All I know is this. If you ever find yourself on an unmarked highway in eastern Oregon, if you see a sign for a town that shouldn't be there, if your GPS stops working and your mile markers start repeating, turn around, drive away. Don't stop to investigate. Because Highway 78 is always hungry, and it never forgets, and sooner or later it will call you home.